Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith and welcome to your video editing bootcamp. You're here because you need to learn how to edit a video in Adobe Premiere Pro, and that's what we're going to cover here in 11 separate parts. This is for beginners. I'm going to have chapters down at the bottom, and I'll have detailed links show up here with deeper tutorials. So anytime there's something where I have more information like color or effects or masking or something like that, that will pop up. This is meant to give you everything you need to create your video. If you're a beginner, this is everything you need to know. So take a deep breath, go get a cup of coffee. I'm going to hold your hand through the whole thing. We're going to cover 11 separate parts, including file setup and media management, user interface and customization, media import and organization, editing skills, markers and transitions, audio, effects and masking, color, titles and graphics, exporting, and then some troubleshooting tips at the end. You're going to be fine. Take a deep breath. I've got you covered. Let's get started with part one. If you're coming to video editing from a phone, if a phone is the first piece of technology you've learned, then the most difficult thing to understand is media management. On a phone, especially on an iPhone, you don't manage any media, it just does it in the background. Here, you're responsible for managing your media, and this is the number one thing you need to learn and do every single time you start a project. If you don't, you're going to pay the price. I get comments every single week where people think they've lost their media. They haven't. They just don't know where the heck it is. You're responsible for managing your media, and that way you'll feel more confident that if something comes up, you'll know where your media is. So let's talk about your computer very basically. And I got tutorials. Here's one of those detailed tutorials about working with computers that are a little bit slower. Just because you want to edit a video doesn't mean your slow computer is going to be fast. If you're trying to push things, if you're editing 4K video, proxies, here's another one. You can go use proxies instead of that. You can only use the power of your system that it has available. If this is a really cheap Ultrabook, you're going to be able to edit maybe HD. That's about it, with not a lot of effects. It has to be a 64-bit operating system, both Mac and Windows. The Mercury playback engine can run in software or in hardware. If you have a graphics processing unit, this is a GPU card in your computer, and it's either NVIDIA or AMD or Intel. If it has a minimum of 2 gigabytes of memory, you're going to play things better in Premiere Pro. If it doesn't mean you can't output a video. It just means you need to set your expectations. Things might be slower. Next up is disk speed. And if you don't have enough room on your computer, you can use external drives. And there are tons of external drives. These guys here, this is a My Passport Western Digital. This is a giant drive, tons of room on it. It's inexpensive, but it's really slow. It spins at 5,400 revolutions per minute, RPM. 5,400 RPM. Don't edit on this. You can back up on this. This is a 7,200 RPM drive. This is the minimum that you will need. Now, maybe your computer has a 5,400 RPM drive in it. That might be a little tough to edit. Again, you're going to have to have a lot of patience. If it's a 7,200 RPM drive, great. If it's an SSD, great. If it's an SSD in your computer, great. It's going to be fast. If you're connecting these, connect them through USB 3 as a minimum or Thunderbolt. So that's your computer. Next up is your media. You finished shooting, now you need to do something with your media. And this is a place where a lot of people get screwed up. They think that their media imports from here into Premiere Pro just by bringing it into Premiere Pro. It doesn't. You need to copy this media at least onto your computer. If this is a really important job, if this is a paying job, then you should be backing it up in at least another place. So here's the card. I just recorded a few things quickly on my camera just so I would have something to move. I'm going to insert this in my computer and I'm going to show you the crazy folder structure that this card has. So the card comes up here. And by the way, I'm using something called Direttore File Manager, and I'll have a link to this. If you're a Mac user, you're probably used to this. I prefer this layout. So here's the card. The card, you don't even see the videos. You see these folders. So if you click on this one, you'll see another folder, another folder, another folder, a freaking other folder, and then finally, we get to see the clips. So that's how deep this folder is. That's the way camera-based cards record. Most of them do. Some will record an MP4, and that's great. This isn't a bad thing. This is just something you need to be used to. If you're backing this up, you need to take this whole AVC HD folder and copy it. Don't just go to the clips and move them because there's lots of other extra information in there. You're going to screw things up if you peek inside and just grab the video files. You need to move the whole folder over, or you can convert these files. I'm going to show you that really quick. So I'm going to launch Media Encoder, and this is part of Premiere Pro. This is like the rendering engine inside Premiere Pro. You can export out of Premiere Pro by itself, or you can send it to Media Encoder, which we'll get to later. But I want to show you how smart Adobe technology is if you use the right methods. So you'll see here, there's our camera card. There's the same folders. And watch that. Remember when I opened the other one, I had all of these folders, but Media Encoder sees the clips right away. That's because Premiere Pro and Media Encoder understand the card-based folder structure, and it just hides it for you if you use the media browser and not import. So we're going to import this stuff in step 2, but right now I want to show you this media management. This is stuff you do have to know. So you can convert these if you want. You can drag them over to here. You can have them as separate files, or you could even stitch them together if you want. Now I don't want to stitch them together. I want them separate. But this way you can create new files that is just a single file. And here you could create like a YouTube HD format, or you could create something of a higher quality like QuickTime 422. Again, we'll cover export and formats later. The important thing here is that converting to a better format doesn't make your video any better. So if you shot in AVC HD, which is a very compressed format, and QuickTime is less compressed, it doesn't mean your video will look better. It might play smoother in your computer, but it also might be quite a bit larger. Like we're talking 5 to 10 times size in the file size that it takes up. So I just wanted to show you, you can convert that giant structure to clips if you want. I'm just going to close Media Encoder and not update those. So again, I would take that whole folder and copy that and then paste it somewhere. Where? Create a project folder for every single thing, and don't put stuff on your desktop. Don't. You're only going to cause problems if you do. If you have 2 hard drives like I do in this computer, then obviously put it on your second drive. If you don't, then at least create a projects folder or a media folder, or maybe the name of your company on your main drive. So this is my home drive here. And I'll create a new folder here. And there it is. And I'll call this My Projects. And inside there, I'll create a new folder for that project. So for this new project, I'll call this My Show. And this is where I would paste in my media. Now, you could create a media folder in here. That does make sense. So create a new folder and I'll call this video. I'll also create another folder in here, and I'll call it audio. Another folder in here, sound effects, images, logos. All right, so now I have folders sitting here and they're empty. This is where I would copy that folder into here. Now, I'm not going to use these files. I've got different files that I'm going to use, so I'm going to start copying those into this folder. So you can see I've set things up similarly over here, and I have converted this particular file to QuickTime. So just to show you the difference in file size, this is 1 gigabyte at 4K with H.264. The HD is 14 gigabytes in size. So imagine I'm copying this from my card. I'm copying this from my hard drive to hard drive. But this is what you need to do. Now start moving stuff to that project folder. And again, it could be on a fast external drive, as long as it is fast and it's connected by USB 3. And don't plug it into a USB 2 port. It should be a USB 3 port. Again, there's my tutorial on working with your computer and making sure things are fast. Now, one thing I'll do, because I realized I have a video folder and that's a little bit too generic. Instead, I want to have an interview folder and I want to have a B-roll folder. What is B-roll? Well, B is secondary footage. The main interview here, or if this was the person talking on camera. So this is my A roll and that's my B roll when I go to my screen. So the same kind of thing. B roll is great for you to add in and cut away. Okay, so I'm going to put the interview in there, and I'll create a new folder in the video folder, and let's just call that B-roll. And for that, I've got some video over here, B-roll, and I'll select that, copy that, and I'll paste that in there. All right. So here's my B-roll. There's my interview. Now let's grab the logo. And then there's a whole bunch of images in here. All right. So I think that's and I've got some music. And I'll copy that. So let me create a new folder for that. Music. And I'll paste that in there. All the folders that I'm creating on my computer will show up in Premiere Pro when I import them. Except for blank folders. If they're empty, they won't show up. But all of the structure in here will show up. All the stuff that's in here. And I don't have my sound effects in here, but I think you get the idea. I would normally place them in there. Okay. So let's close this up and look at our whole project. So there's the show. There's each one of the folders. I guess I could have put my music in the audio. So my music and audio, images, logo, sound effects if I had them, video with B-roll, and interview. Okay. the next time I create a project, I would create a new folder here and do the same thing. A lot of people will create the folder structure and just leave it as a blank folder, copy that folder and paste it in. Kind of like a template idea, so it's always the same. All right, now that you have your stuff organized on your computer, and I would back this up, if this was a paying job, that whole My folder would now be going to another drive. Like I said, something like these drives, or they're really inexpensive drives, like $50 to $80 with multiple terabytes that you can back things up. Okay, so that is, I think that's everything in step one, backup and media management. All right, we're now going to look at the interface and customization. The most critical thing to understand is the files you just copied and moved over, at no time will they ever go inside Premiere Pro. A lot of people think importing means you take a file, you copy it, and you put it inside Premiere Pro. You don't. They're links. Everything is linked to the original media. If the original media is moved, then you will have a broken link showing as missing media. Everything is linked, and you can see that when you open up Premiere Pro if you've created other files. Here's some other files that I've been working on. A lot of people think that this is a file. It's not, it's a link. Word does this, Photoshop does this. These are just recent documents you've worked on. If you happen to, at the end, I'll show you some troubleshooting tips, clear the cache, and this list is blank, a lot of people think if it's blank here, then Premiere Pro deleted my media. Premiere Pro does not delete the media. You know how you know? Because you went to all the trouble to make those folders, so you immediately go to those folders and then you see them and you know all your stuff is still there. It's the people that came from a phone that didn't manage media that see this blank and they think everything is gone. It's not gone. Premiere Pro does not delete your media. Go find it where you put it in your projects folder. See how you're building up that confidence? Oh yeah, hey Premiere Pro, you don't know where it is? I know where it is. Okay, so this is the first screen you get. You have your recent projects, you can create a new project, or you can open something that isn't in this recent list. The recent list is just the last, I don't know, over 10 or 12 recent files. So let's create a new project in the upper left. So click New Project, and you'll get a dialog box asking you where that project is. Well, we need to find that project, so I'll browse, and I put it in my home directory, and I called it My Projects. There it is. There it is. So I'm opening up the My Projects folder and the My Show folder. And what you can do is, I do this all the time, is I'll select the My Show, select that, and copy that, and then open that up, because I don't want my project to be in My Projects. I want it to be in My Show. Those are the folders that we created before, and I'm creating a new project file there. So remember, I copied that, so I'll paste it. So let's just look at these top two areas. The name of the show is My Show. It can be anything you want. And the location is in the My Projects My Show folder. So you could name this My Show 2, 3, 4, whatever. Next up is the rendering. And I talked about this at the beginning about a GPU. I have a RTX 5000 in here, and that's the one I'm going to use. That's the default. If you're on Apple, then you might see Metal as an option in here. If you've got a powerful GPU, use that. Premiere Pro does a good job of anticipating that and selecting that. If you get an error that the driver doesn't work, you have two options. Update the driver, which you can do on the Windows side. On the Mac side, you just have to wait for Apple. Or just disregard the warning. It doesn't mean Premiere Pro is broken. It just means it can't use your GPU because it's either an old version of a driver that isn't compatible, or it's just such a slow card, it makes no difference. For that, you'll be sent to Mercury Playback software only. everything is going to look fine when you export. This has nothing to do with the export quality. Everything's going to look good, even on a really slow computer. This just means you might have better performance with a GPU. Well, you will. The rest of these you can leave the same. The scratch disks, you want them to be same as project, same as project. Turn everything to same as project. Because Premiere Pro will be creating files in the background for you, automatic backup files, and it will cache things for you. So just leave all of this stuff where it is as the same project. Ingest settings, do not turn this on. This is only if you're working with proxies. Like I said, got a full tutorial on that. So I'm going to leave all of that, click OK, and now I'm in a blank project. If we go back to the folder, you'll see there's my project inside the My Show folder. Premiere Pro is going to create an auto backup. It does this automatically. But you should also turn on backup to the cloud. You're not backing up your media. You're backing up the project files, which aren't very big at all. In the Edit menu on Windows, the Premiere Pro menu on the Mac, Preferences, Autosave, and you can see I've got automatic save projects turned on. It automatically saves, and you can change this to however often you want, the maximum project versions, and save backup project to Creative Cloud. This is very useful. I don't want to turn that one on. I've got a tutorial here about why I don't turn that on. So now my stuff is going to be backed up here and in the cloud. Doesn't mean my media is messed up, but if something goes wrong with this project, remember we backed up the card. Where's my card? You backed up the card here and you backed up the card somewhere else. So at the very worst, you take, let's say I backed up my media here and I've got my project in the cloud and this computer blows up. No problem. I got a cloud recent version. I've got my media. I can recreate every single thing just by opening that project and pointing to this media. Very nice. Click OK. And the first time that Premiere Pro saves, it's going to save an auto backup. You'll see an automatic folder. All right, so let's look at the interface. The great thing about Adobe is that they have a lot of common conventions between applications. So if you've used something else like Photoshop or InDesign, there's a lot of similarities. There's a move tool and there are panels and customization. So let's have a look at that. Each one of these is a panel. You'll see a blue line around something when you click on it. This is what is in focus. It is unbelievably important in Premiere Pro to understand what panel is selected. If you don't have the right panel selected, you won't have the right commands available. So keep an eye on the blue line. Every one of us, even longtime editors, have the wrong panel selected, but at least we know what to do. You go to export something out. Hey, how come? Crap, I gotta go select my timeline. Okay. Panels are also stacked up. So this list is actually multiple panels stacked up, one behind each other. And you can close any of these by clicking on the Hamburg menu and choosing Close Panel. If you accidentally make a mess and change things completely, up at the top you've got a bunch of workspaces. And the first workspace you'll probably see is this learning space. Editing is where you want to go to most of the time. If you've completely made a mess and let's say you moved this panel over here and it looks like a mess and oh my goodness, Premiere Pro looks like a mess, double click on the editing workspace and it resets. Now for me, I've turned off a dialog box. For you, when you double click on a workspace, it will ask you if you want to reset that workspace. There's also a checkbox there to tell Premiere Pro, don't ever show me that again. I know what I'm doing when I reset the workspace. So I can reset that workspace. It's always going to look like this, a nice familiar way to look. In the window menu, workspaces, you'll see again all of the workspaces you have. Now don't be confused by this one. This is one I made to emulate an iMovie kind of interface with very, very similar layout. But these workspaces are saved in here, and you can also add more, so you can save a new workspace, you can edit the workspaces, and you can turn this on. It's probably on by default, import workspaces from projects. You may want this on or off. I always turn it off because I don't want someone else's workspaces in my copy of Premiere Pro. And that's what will happen if I open somebody else's workspace and they created a layout of whatever they want. Now I've got that in my project. I don't want that. So I turn that off. If you want that, turn it on. It is a good way to share a workspace with someone else. You can edit the workspaces, and here they are, and you can rename them. You can also move things down here to don't show. So I could move my iMovie one down here to not show, and now it's not going to show in that list at all. If you get to a certain amount, then you'll see a little pop-up menu in here. So that's where they exist. If this panel gets closed, again, you can double click on editing. It's going to reset that workspace. Okay. So what I tend to do is I turn off some panels that I don't need, like info, history. You might like this. I tend to know what the heck I did in the last little while, but history, and you can set how many things are in that list. History is a good thing to leave on for beginners. It will show you all the last operations that you have. I'm a pro. I'm turning it off. Markers will leave those up. You can reorder these by dragging them around, and something that happens quite often is the project tends to move around. So if you come back over here, this is the project panel, and you don't see where your project is, it probably got moved around. So I like to have it tucked over on the left-hand side. So each one of these has a specific job. This is where your media comes in, and this is where you edit your media, which we'll get to in the next section. But all of this stuff is customizable. If you go to the color workspace, you'll see a different workspace. If you go to effects and audio and graphics, Adobe's done a really good job of organizing the layout just for the stuff you need to do. So if you're editing graphics, go to the graphics workspace, because it's going to show you things like the Essential Graphics panel. All right, so here's some other conventions. One is this double arrow idea. Wherever you mouse in between something, you'll see double arrows. So you can resize things. So typically I'll leave everything where they are, but sometimes if my timeline has so many tracks in it, I need to see it, then I'll make that area larger. The same with the program monitor. You can make that very large, or you can make the source monitor large. And we'll show you what those panels are for in a minute. Now, while we're also talking about the interface and customization, back in the preferences, so again, in the edit menu on Windows, the Premiere Pro menu on Mac, we can go look at our preferences. And there are a ton of preferences in Premiere Pro. We're not going to go through all of them. I encourage you to poke around in here, but there are some things that are really useful. How do you want things to open, which we'll get into once we have some media in here. There's that workspace reset warning. I have that turned off. You can turn off that project loading error dialog box and the system compatibility issues. Again, you have an old computer with an old graphics card and an old driver, and you don't want to be bugged about it, turn that stuff off and just keep working. Doesn't mean you're going to be fast, but at least you won't be bothered by some dialog boxes. I also have turned this off, show project in bin. I don't want that name, so my stuff will just have the name of the bin. A bin is another name for a folder. You can call it a folder or a bin. I'll probably call it both things as I'm working on here. But you'll see each one of these has a different set of preferences, like how bright do you want the interface? How bright do you want the controls? There's audio settings in here, which we'll get into in audio. We already looked at audio save. Capture settings we don't use because we're not capturing from tape anymore, but there's lots of stuff in here. Media settings, and you can see down here I'm using my NVIDIA and my Intel card to speed things up. Media cache, which we'll get into at the end. Clearing a cache is something that you're going to have to get used to if you've got problems. Sync settings, timeline. So this, I think, is worth exploring. The timeline preferences. When we talk about transitions, video and audio transitions, you can set a default duration for those. You can have the mouse scrolling vertical or horizontal. So if you have a scroll mouse, or even if you have a trackpad with 2 fingers on, then you can set the scrolling of the timeline that when you scroll, it goes left and right or up and down. So sometimes you have so many tracks that you're not really going left and right. You just want to go up and down. So you can change that. Right now it's set on horizontal. You can snap the playhead in the timeline when snap is enabled. This might be something useful to new users. I don't like that because I like to freely move my timeline, and when I want it to snap, I hold the Shift key and move that and it snaps, which we'll do in a bit. But you might want to turn that on and explore that. Okay. Now the last customization, again, is in the Edit menu or the Premiere Pro menu on the Mac, and that's keyboard shortcuts. And here you can map any kinds of shortcuts you want. Now this is really for beginners, so you're probably mostly going to go to menus and not use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, but I want to show you here that if you end up becoming more familiar with Premiere Pro, and there's an operation like duplicate doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, you could make a keyboard shortcut or enable something on and off. Okay. Now the last is the tools. We talked about the panels. We talked about these little menus. Oh yeah, there's also these wrenches, which you'll see everywhere for customization, but there's also the tools in here, and this is the Move tool. It's the same keyboard shortcut of Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator. It's the V key, and if you want to, if you're wondering how do you remember that, well, think of this: move with the V key. It's the Move tool. There are selection tools for track selecting. There are editing tools for ripple editing and rolling, ripple editing, rate stretch, razor blades, slip and slide tools, pen tool, hand tool, and type tool. We'll get through all of those, but this is the this itself is a panel. So if I resize that, you see that changes. Again, you make a mess of things, you can reset that. So that's the Premiere Pro interface. It's fairly easy to understand that it's panel-based and things are in focus, and there's lots of little drop-down menus where you can customize things. So get used to that, and once you get more advanced, customize that as you see fit. You can turn a whole bunch of panels off if you want. I got a tutorial on how to make Premiere Pro simple, where I shut every panel off. I close every panel that isn't useful for an absolute beginner. But we are going to concentrate on the default interface that you're used to. I don't want to confuse matters. I think for brand new users, you should be looking at the way Premiere Pro comes out of the box. Whew. Okay, we haven't even started editing, but all of this is incredibly important. If you just try to jump into editing, you'll lose your media, or you'll close a panel and you'll not know why Premiere Pro looks the way it does. This is how I teach. It's not about pushing buttons, it's about why. I'm going to teach you why. So now you should feel confident about taking your card, making some folders, backing everything up, and opening up Premiere Pro and starting a project. Next, just as critical, is importing. All right, how are you doing so far? Okay, good. All right, let's talk about importing and media management. Probably the most confusing part of Premiere Pro, but we're going to make it very easy. There's one keyboard shortcut that I want you to get used to, and this is on North American keyboards. You can get to it. Again, you can go into the keyboard shortcuts if you're using a non-North American keyboard and find out where it is. It's maximizing a panel. Remember, we talked about the panels. One useful thing is to be able to take a panel that seems kind of small and temporarily make it very, very big, do something in there, and then make it back to the same size so it's not obscuring things. And that's the tilde key. It's the little squiggle key above the tab key. Whenever your mouse is over, and you don't have to click with the mouse, wherever your mouse is over, when you hit the tilde key, it makes it larger. So you'll see that down here. I'll move my mouse, tap the tilde key, tap it again, and it's the same as going to the little Hamburg menu and choosing maximize panel group. It's just a little bit easier. So that's going to be important when we're starting to work with a bunch of media. So a lot of people will drag and drop. Stop doing that. Remember I showed you that the card file had a whole bunch of folders in it? Well, drag and drop from your desktop, you're guaranteed going to break things if you do that. Premiere Pro uses a lot of extra information called metadata that's written into those folders and the structure of the files. So dragging and dropping, you might have been used to using that for many, many years, especially Mac users. For Premiere Pro, it is the worst habit that you have. It is bad. You need to break that habit. And don't use file import. That's also bad. Instead, use the media browser. Media browser is very intelligent. Remember I showed you the media encoder where it peeked into all of those folders and all you saw was the video files? It just said, don't even pay attention to those. Guess what the media browser does? The same thing. So if you are looking at your card that you've copied and you look at that AVC HD card, the media browser will only see your video files and that's what you import. It's so much easier. We don't have that. We just have a bunch of folders that we created and brought in, but that's still fine. So it's down here at the back. It can change its location depending on, sometimes it gets all the way over in the left here. I like it to have it second. And when you click on it, it brings up this browser for files. Now I've created some favorites here where I get to my stock from ArtGrid and ArtList and my footage and my show with all of my demo files on it. There's each of the drives that are connected in here. So again, if you're editing from a secondary drive, you can get to that here. You can also click on the little drop-down menu and jump right to your home directory. And this is the same for both Mac and Windows. So with my directory, I'm going to find my files over here on the left. So you can see it's already getting a little bit crowded. So I'll tap the tilde key and I'll remember those double-headed arrows and drag this out. This is getting much, much easier to see. Oh, in fact, remember my projects were there? There's my show. I could twirl this down and look at my show there. So there's all of my files and there's my Premiere Pro project. Now I don't want to import that. I want to import everything else. So if you hold the Shift key and click or select all, Control A on Windows, Command A on the Mac, or you can hold the Control key on Windows, the Command key on Mac. Remember, I didn't put anything in there. I should have, but I didn't. And I'll select those folders there. And I'll right-click and choose Import. I'm not importing the project because that's going to be a problem. You can't import the project that's already open. Okay, so it immediately closed. It brought the project panel in the front. So if we go back to the media browser, that's where I was, and this is where I am. Media browser, if you have to import 3 things, it will import one. If you do them one at a time, and it will send you back to the project. It's Premiere Pro's way of saying, hey, this is where your files are, and it has them selected for you. So I'm going to tap my tilde key and make this smaller now and go back over to my show. And there's my video, and there's my B-roll, and there's my interview, and all of that stuff in here. Okay, immediately after doing this, you know what I'm going to do? Save. Control S on Windows, Command S on Mac. Yes, there's autosave, but don't trust it. I'm surprised when I get a cry from help from someone who says, I lost my work. I was working for 90 minutes and I didn't save. Well, there's an autosave. Don't trust it. Why? Just don't. Just don't ask why. Just don't freaking trust it. I save constantly. When I make my project, I saved. I imported the media, save. Control S, Command S. It's in the File menu. Save, just like anything else. Control S, Command S. Save. Save, 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 save. Please, for the love of God, save, save, save. Especially when you're about to do something tricky. Oh my goodness. A tricky edit or apply effects or chop stuff up. Save, 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 save. Okay. So all of our files are now loaded in here. And there they are. There's all our images. There's our audio. There's our music. Now, there are different ways to look at things in this folder here, in the project panel. Down at the bottom, you'll see these 3 different ways of viewing things: list view, icon view, and freeform view. And right now we're just looking at the folders themselves. So if we open one up and we look at it, we can see this view. If I tap the tilde key, the freeform view allows me to even move this stuff around. So if I wanted to organize things in a certain way, I could do that. Like, oh, those are my interesting files there. These guys should be together over here. And you can change the size of these if you want. And I've got a whole tutorial on freeform view. It's very useful for storyboarding. I never use it. But icon view is also very useful. And this also has a resize. And Premiere Pro has something called Hover Scrub. Media Browser has this too. So as you mouse over, and I'm not clicking with my mouse, I'm just mousing over, and you can see a preview of what this looks like. This little button here will help you sort this. So right now it's just using the order that I'm using. So this is a lot like the freeform view where I can move it around. But let's say you wanted this based on the names, that this was shot alphabetically, and you could choose name, and now it would sort based on that name, which it already is. But you could sort it based on video type, the media start. So it's depending on the media start time for each one of those. Lots of different ways to organize these. And then, of course, the list view. And you'll notice the list view has got a bunch of headers here with lots of information. I like to scooch this guy over here, the video info, so I can look at my frame size, because I tend to work with a lot of different frame sizes and frame rates. And you can see all of this is 25 frames per second. This is a bunch of ArtGrid stock that I brought over. And there's even more all the way over here. Lots of great ways that you can organize this information. Now, you might be wondering, where is our media? Where's the rest of our stuff? Premiere Pro has a new way of working. Premiere Pro opens things in new panels. So if we go back to the whole project, that's where it is. When I opened up my B-roll, that's where that is. When I opened up video, that's where B-roll and the interview showed up. You can close these by clicking on the little hamburg menu and close those. Or you can leave them up, and I could leave this one in icon view and this one in list view. And they're the same files here as the same files here. So if you're wondering why these get larger, well, if I open up audio and then music, there's all of my music files showing up. So you can reorder these. Again, you can close them. I think this is actually useful because, especially in not too complicated projects, you know, I've got all my music in my music folder. Doesn't matter if that opens up. All of my B-roll available. So all of the stuff is there. And again, depending on how you want to organize it. So I'll collapse that back down again. And if you wanted to, you could create your own bins. So that's what this folder is down here. Creates a new bin, which is a folder. So I could call this Places. And right now it's empty. And if I double click on it, it's empty. If I go to Media Browser, and now I'll go back to, let me make this larger. So now I'm back in Media Browser and I'm looking at the files on my hard drive, and it can take a few moments to draw all of the thumbnails here. Most of these are H.264 files, so they take a moment to redraw the thumbnails. So if I want to import a file, I'll right-click on that file and import it. You'll see that it's in the Places folder. And if I go back over to my show and in Places, there it is. This is an easy one to get mixed up with. Sometimes I have the wrong folder selected or open when I go to the media browser and import, and it's the wrong thing. So if you're wondering, well, how do I find that? Well, what if everything was closed up? In here, you can search. So I can search for MP4, and that's where that MP4 file is. I can search for my WAV files, .wav files, and they show up. So this is a quick little search field. And if you want, you could click on this, create a new search from the query. So this is now going to search for WAV files. So when I double click on that, it shows up in here. So if you're used to working with things like smart playlists in iTunes, you could create a smart playlist and you don't have to put everything in there. The playlist will show you everything based on that artist wherever they are. Same thing here. This is now, it's in this list. So if I close this up, you'll see it has a special icon beside it. And anytime I add a new .wav, a new WAV music file in here, or audio or dialogue or whatever, it will also show up in that folder. It's not duplicating it. It's just a pointer, a link to where that is in my project. I don't use these guys. I'm going to delete that. I'm not deleting my media. In fact, Premiere Pro will alert you whenever you're deleting media that you're used in a timeline. It will always alert you, hey, you're deleting something that is in a timeline. Oh boy, that's really good, because sometimes you think, you know, did I use that? I'm not sure. Oops, I won't get rid of that. Okay. All right, so our media is in here. Let's go back to our... Okay, here's a perfect example of, huh? Where did my video go? I think it's lost. And people will say, Premiere Pro deleted my media. No, look at the darn search field. I left the word WAV in there. I'm going to get rid of that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so there's my video of Jonathan Van Bilsen. And Jonathan's got a great show, Photos and Travel. And we're going to look, I interviewed him, and he's got just a fantastic travel show. He's a great writer. Okay, so if you double click on this clip, it loads it into the source monitor. And the source monitor will show you the video. And if you click here, you'll see the audio. So I can see the recorded audio file, and that's the video file. Sometimes I will use this to find a point. For instance, you can see where each one of these segments is changed as he says certain words. So he's listening to me. I'm actually on a Zoom call. I'm watching him remotely, and I'm directing him with questions, and he's answering them. So each gap is me asking him a different question. So I could use this to help identify different areas of the interview. So this is not in the timeline yet. We don't have a timeline. And this is the next important thing, and that's making sequences or timelines. It's the same thing. A sequence has a specific setting of a frame size, a frame rate, and audio settings. And it's up to you to pick the correct setting that you need. What I always do is I'll create a sequence that's based on the output. So if I know that I want to go to 2997 or 25 frames a second, I'll make a sequence based on that. For new users, you can almost always simply create a new sequence based on that clip. So you'll see right here, it's 2997. And if I right click on this clip, there's new sequence from clip. And when I select that, it creates a new sequence based on that clip setting. All of the settings will be the same. It will name this the same too. So that's one way of doing that. And I don't think if you're working with a bunch of H.264 files and you're shooting on a DSLR, this is a fine way to do it. I'll show you the other way. And that's in this little page icon down here, this little new item. I do not go to the file menu, new, for any of this. And the reason being is that if you have, remember I told you about a panel being selected? If you have the wrong panel selected and you go to the file menu, some of those choices will be grayed out. The little new item icon will never be grayed out. So I always go down here to create a new sequence. So this is a manually created sequence. And you can see there's a bunch of choices here. And DSLR 1080, 30 is an example. And there's 4K and red versions in here. So you could use this as a method. Here are the settings for that one. It's using an edit mode DSLR. And you can change this if you want. There's the frame rate, and you can change the frame rate. There's the size, square pixels, no fields. This is not interlaced. And the rest of that, you can leave that the way it is. And now when I click OK, you can see that sequence showed up here. Well, why did that one show up here and that one showed up there? This one showed up in the folder of where that was. So that's why it showed up there. You can drag it out. So now it's out. So two different ways of creating sequences. You can always copy the contents of one sequence into another sequence, or you can go back to the sequence. So if we go to the one I made, if you go to the sequence settings, you can make some changes in here. You can't change the channel format, but you can change the other settings. So again, I think that's good. I'm just going to delete that, and that's what this the one I made manually, I can just click here in the trash. And I'm just going to select this and rename this interview. And you can see it renames in here. So now I've got his clip in the timeline. As soon as I add something in the timeline, it shows up in the program monitor. The program monitor is what your final video will look like. The source monitor can be used, and some people don't even use it. It can be used to preview a clip before you put it into the timeline. You don't have to use it. I find it's useful, like I said, by looking at the audio wave and finding in and out points. Okay, so this is an interview. If we play this, you can see there's lots of setup going on. There's lots of me talking back and forth.
I was born in the Netherlands. When I was about 10 years old, my parents decided it was time to move.
There's parts in here where Jonathan corrects himself, and he feels that he could have delivered that better, so he'll stop and he'll start again. Of course, I want all of those out. So we're going to have to chop all of that up, and that'll come up in our editing skills, but I want to explore the timeline a little bit more, customizing the timeline. By default, you get 3 video tracks and 3 audio tracks and a mix track. The size of these tracks can be changed. Remember that double arrow. If I mouse up a little bit and drag this up, I can drag this and increase the size. You can also double click on a track to make it the default size. You can also hold the Shift key and change all of the tracks with your scroll wheel or trackpad. If you hold the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and use the scroll wheel, you can change just that track. And I use this a lot. So you can see the same thing down here. It's the same kind of waveform down here at the bottom. And I can see those same areas of where I was talking. There's a zoom bar down at the bottom where you can zoom in and out. I never use this. What do I use instead? I use just a few keyboard shortcuts that I think are essential to understand. The backslash key, which on a North American keyboard is above the Enter key or the Return key, takes me out to 80% zoom. So it doesn't fill the timeline. It opens up the timeline and gives me a little bit of an area on the end. So if I need to drag a new clip on the end, I've got room. I use this all the time. Well, what if you want to zoom in? Well, that's what the plus and minus keys are at the top of the keyboard. So I can zoom in and out. And if you're used to editing, you will be using those keys a million times a day over and over again. You can use the scroll wheel and add Alt on Windows, Option on Mac, and scroll in that way. That's another option to do that. But this is the one thing you will be doing constantly in video editing. Zoom out. What are you doing? Zoom in. Do something, zoom out, move over here, zoom in. Zoom out, zoom out. And in fact, the backslash key is it's really two operations. So let's zoom out. So that's one backslash. I'll go over to this part and I'll zoom in. Boop, 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 boop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zooms. So I hit the plus key. And this is not the plus on the numeric keypad. If you have a number pad, this is at the top of the keyboard. So I zoomed in 4 times. I'll go out with the backslash key. I'll go over here and I'll hit the backslash key again. So because it remembered 4 times in, the backslash key took me all the way out. I moved over, took me all the way in as if I hit plus 4 times. That's useful. Keep that in the back of your mind. The other thing you can customize is if you go to the little wrench here, and you can customize whether you're looking at video thumbnails or not, whether you want to show keyframes, whether you want the name of the file, and I've turned on the audio names. Typically, the audio file doesn't have its name set up. So this is ways to customize the timeline and how you want it to be viewed. So you can choose to show the audio waveform or not. And there's also the Hamburg menu over here, where we can change how the audio waveforms look. So if I turn that off, then you'll get a stereo audio waveform. And there's no right or wrong. Some people like it one way, some people like it both facing up. This way, which is the default, it's easier for you to see quieter waveforms, like on a boom mic. Okay. You can also right-click in this header, and you can customize this. So if I choose Customize, I can now change what these buttons are. So I can take some out, I can delete them. I'd say leave those the way they are. The audio ones, same thing. This divider divides between the audio and the video. So if I right-click down here and Customize, then I can change what I'm looking at audio-wise. So what you could do is you could drag this little guy, and now you've got a little
whatever size you want
LED meter on that track alone. You can also go back to Customize, and you can drag things in or out or reset the layout if you want to go back to that layout. So this timeline, so the sequence panel and this panel are directly connected. The source monitor is not. So this is independent. This is showing you what you're editing. One last setting that I want to show you, I should have showed you when we set up the project. This is in the File menu, Project Settings, General. This is turned off by default, but I suggest you turn it on. Display the project item name and label colors for all instances. With this on, if I rename that clip, it's going to rename in the timeline. The default is to not do that. The default will keep different names throughout. There's no right or wrong. Some people like it not being the same. I want one version of the file to be named exactly the same in my project panel and on my timeline. So that's why I keep it on. All right, next up, we're going to talk about some editing skills. Okay, so you still with me? Great, excellent. You've got your stuff imported, and if you need to import more things, now remember the media in the project bin is linked to the stuff on your hard drive, but it's not dynamically linked. It doesn't update. So if you add more things to the folders on your hard drive, you still have to manually re-import them. There is an automated way. It's a paid product. I've got a tutorial for it. It's called Watchtower. All right, so we've got our stuff in Premiere Pro. Now we're going to start editing. That's how much work you have to do before you even start to edit. But now we feel confident. We know where our clips are. If something happens, we're backed up. We could recreate this whole thing with a backup project and our backed up media. So, as I mentioned before, we've got our clips here.
What was the question?
Okay, and it doesn't make sense to have this in one giant clip. We need to cut it up into pieces. I'm going to show you two ways of doing it. One way is to make sub-clips. So this is still a link to the original master clip. It's just easier to work with. It's like you have a separate clip. Can I make a confession here? I'm too lazy to make sub-clips. I cut the stuff on the timeline. That's another way of doing it. Let me just show you my method. So I'll go back to the beginning. And because I'm zoomed all the way out, I'm not as accurate. So I'll zoom in, plus. So I just hit plus twice on the top of the keyboard to zoom in. And I happen to know we talked a little bit here. So all of this stuff is probably not useful. I'll move my playhead here, and then I'm hitting the space bar to play.
When did I fall in love with travel?
And I'll move ahead because in this example, anytime you have somebody in an interview where you don't have a second person asking the questions, you have to build the question into the person answering the question. So we had to work that out first. And I know he started about here.
I fell in love with...
You notice that there was a little pause. So I'm not going to cut exactly where he talks. I'm going to cut at this point here. So let me show you two ways to do this. The first way is the hard way, and the second way is the easy way. The hard way is to grab the razor tool, cut this, grab the move tool, click on this, hit the delete key, select this, and move it back. That's a lot of operations. Let me undo that. Instead, I'm going to use, this is another keyboard shortcut you really should use. It's the Q and the W key. This is a ripple edit. Ripple meaning like ripples in a pond when you throw a rock. Something that starts here has an effect outside of that. So a ripple edit means you're editing here, but it affects everything else. And in this example, we want to remove the start and ripple everything to the right over to the left. And there is a ripple edit tool here. And when you see it change to the orange, if you click and drag, it moves everything. Or if you just tap the Q key, because the Q is on the left side of the keyboard on a North American keyboard, the Q key, if I tap Q, boom, it does the same thing. So that's ripple trim previous edit, to playhead. And what you're doing is you're trimming it to where the playhead is. So that's why you play it to where you want.
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
You hit stop and then hit Q. So this works perfectly with one track. If you have more than one track, all of the tracks will move. If you want that to happen, great. If you don't, you have to lock them, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So this is where he starts talking, the first question.
I fell in love with travel, I think, right from the get-go, from the trip to Canada back in the day. The whole airplane concept was great. I didn't really travel much out.
So now I'm waiting for him to finish answering and pause for the next one. There's two things I can do. First of all, editors should listen to every single thing they've been handed. So you watch everything. And this can take a lot of time, but it's the only way you know the content that's in there. I happen to have listened to this already, and to make this faster, there are 3 keys, J, K, L, and they're right beside each other on a North American keyboard. So if you hit the L key, it plays. If you hit it again, it plays faster. So I can speed up my listening.
Outside of Canada until I was about 17, and I went to Europe, and I think I was bitten there. And I
hit it one more time.
Country after country, we've gone 107 countries. Turn my phone off, okay? Sorry.
So here he's found that his phone is on, so that whole thing we're not even going to use. So I'll play a little bit forward.
I've had it. There we go. Now we're into it.
So now he's taking that whole question. So I don't need the first stuff again. So Q, bye-bye. I just ripple trimmed that whole piece off. Now I don't care about that. I'm going to hit play from this point.
I have always loved traveling. Ever since that first airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was young. I really got in my blood. I enjoyed the program. I got into photography at a very age and realized that the world's quite a place to take explore. So I now understand.
KL.
So it's always been in my blood, I think.
So I hit K to stop and L to continue playing. And the reason why these are set up this way is because the keys are right beside each other. So it's like, it's as if you had a hardware shuttle and you're shuttling back and forth. So I'm going to get a little, I'm leaving a little space there. Okay, so now I have the first clip. This is where I want to cut it. So I'll hold Control Shift or Command Shift K, and that cuts everything. It's like going in to get the razor blade and cutting, but it's incredibly accurate because it's exactly where the playhead is. So this is my first clip. Now I'll show you up here. If we were doing this with subclips, it would be very much the same way. Again, we can zoom in or hit the plus and minus keys.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. I fell in love with travel.
Okay, so, and I think that was it, right?
I have always loved travel.
No, that's where he starts right there. So I've identified where I want that to start here. There's no ripple trimming in here because rippling is about more than one clip, and the source monitor only shows you one clip at a time. So I'm going to set an in point, and I hit the I key, or you can hit this button here to set an in point. So that's where he starts talking.
I have always loved traveling.
The same
since
keys.
That first airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was, I really got in my blood. I enjoyed the program. I got into photography at a very age and realized that the world's quite a place to explore. So I now understand Europe. So it's always been in my blood.
Okay, so he's finished right there. Now I'll either click on this or hit the O key for an out. So now we have an in and out. So if we zoom on here and look, that in and out is the same as this in and out. They're not connected. They're separate. This is a different in and out point. I'm doing this 2 different ways. You would only do it one way. So if you wanted to make a subclip from this, you could go to the clip and make a subclip. You can see it's a keyboard shortcut there, Command U or Control U. Hit that keyboard command, or you can right click, and there it is. And you have an option to restrict the trims to the clip boundaries. Restricting the trim means you can't go past that. You've cut the clip, and it's almost like that's the clip and you don't have more. In this example, it doesn't matter, but sometimes you want that. You can easily change this by editing the subclip, right-click, edit subclip, and turn that back on. So that's Start Travel. And maybe I could number it, and you can see it looks different than the master clip. That's a subclip. I've got a whole tutorial on working with subclips if you want to work with that. But basically, you'd do the same thing. You'd go through this and start chopping it up into pieces. I'm going to do that right now really quick and not use subclips.
My wife does it. Choosing a location is...
So watch this. I'm going to hit the Q key, and it moves back. It doesn't disturb this clip because it's just ripple trimming the previous clip. I can see about here is where he ends.
You know, it was on the list.
Command or Control Shift K to put a cut in there.
Well, traveling is something that's very, very dependent on the way you this back and forth.
Q.
Traveling is really book it. Book my airfare, and away I go.
Command or Control Shift K. And again, I'm using the scroll wheel. Remember in the preferences I showed that the scroll wheel or the trackpad is horizontal zooming. That's the default. That allows me to stay zoomed in, but quickly move around. Boom, 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 boom. So I'm using one tool the whole time, the move tool, and using keyboard shortcuts to make it faster.
I have hundreds. Yeah. There are certain places which...
So right there, he pauses. Q. I'll go to the end.
talk about the experiences that I've had in certain countries.
Command or Control Shift K. And you notice I'm always giving myself a little breathing room at the end.
Okay.
Now I'm using the left and right arrow keys. When I want to get very accurate, the left and right arrow keys move one frame at a time. And I notice I want to find that spot where he has a good expression on his face. Q. Oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned this before, this is track targeting. The Q and the W key only work with whatever you have selected. So if I don't have that one selected on V1, then ripple trimming just won't work. We'll talk a little bit more about V1 and V2 in a second. So that's that's trimmed.
But still with the same mandates.
Command Shift K, scroll down, move to that beginning. Q, move to the end. Command Shift K. Q. Q. Now my first trim there, I could actually hear me saying something in the background, so I trimmed it again. Command Shift K or Control Shift K. Q.
To other people, as I'm sure you know by now.
Control Shift K. There's a lot of dead space there.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that.
So I think it's about here.
Well, writing is something.
Again, I'm using the arrow keys, Q.
Really, really helped me when I do the writing for the show.
Space. Q.
Sure.
Arrow keys, Q. End of the end.
Going very, very well. Numbers are good.
Backspace. So there's all my clips, all my cuts. But now I've got my interview cuts. And typically, it's a good idea to call this selects. It's a very standard thing to do. These are all the selects, the selected clips that you're going to use, and you'll use them somewhere else. At this point, a lot of people will create a new blank timeline, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'll leave this one intact because it's just a clean reference point. It's so easy to create multiple timelines, multiple sequences. It's a great way to work. So Over here, I'll right click and choose duplicate. Select that and call this rough -01. So this is the first one. When I double click on it, it opens beside here. So just like these panels that were open, we have a timeline on panels here. So there's our rough one, there's selects, and I can close that off. So now I'm going to start fine-tuning this edit and adding some B-roll, adding some music and things of that sort. Oh yeah, and what I would have done a few times now, save. As soon as I finish cutting all those, save. Duplicate and open that up, save. Save, 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 save. You're not saving different versions. You're saving this same project, my show project. You're saving the same one. All right, so let's talk about adding clips to this. So let's go to my videos. This is the B-roll. I'll open that up. I'll make this a little smaller. So I've got B-rolls and I'm going to close places. I got music, B-roll, and I also want the images because I'm going to use that. Because he talks about plus, plus, plus. I'm going to zoom in. Now, when he's looking down, that's not a very good way to start, so I'll trim that. Just before he opens his mouth, cue.
I have always loved traveling.
And we're going to put a transition in here. I'll show you transitions more later, but I want this to start to up from black. So if you move the mouse to the edge, when you have the move tool, it's the trim tool. And if you click, you'll add a trim point. So this is just a regular trim point. And the keyboard shortcut for default transition, like I said, we'll look at transitions more detail in section. Control D on Windows, Command D on Mac is a cross dissolve. So now it dissolves.
I have always loved traveling. Ever since that first
And you know what I would do? Save. Okay.
airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was young. I just really, it got into my blood. I enjoyed nature program. I enjoyed.
So we now have a problem. We've got this jump cut here. And that's not something you want. Jump cuts suck. And it drives me crazy to see folks on YouTube do that. I'm going to get on my soapbox for 2 seconds here. Jump cuts are not a style. People don't say, gee, I love jump cuts. When you watch a movie, if there are jump cuts, it's meant to indicate an expanse of time that's happening. If it's just a regular interview from this and you have a jump cut, it's considered wrong. It's an error. I don't care. Please don't comment that you think jump cuts are good. They're not. They just mean you're a lazy editor. Okay, I said it. All right, so how do we fix that? So we're going to fix that with some B-roll. And in this example, I've got a still image, and this is the Canadian coast. This is an image that Jonathan sent me. So I'm going to drag this over top of that edit. And when you drag that in, you see that it has a duration. And if I move my playhead over top, you'll see it. By default, still images have a duration of 5 seconds. You can change that bigger, smaller. We can make this a little bit bigger. I'm holding down Alt or Option on Mac and using my scroll wheel. Now, this kind of doesn't make sense because it chops.
It's always been in my blood, I think.
Chops the top of the.
Choosing a location is.
The lighthouse. So, we're going to get into effects a little bit later, but let's talk about changing the position of this frame, because photographs don't necessarily, well, they're not always 16 by 9. In fact, the default format for most cameras is 4 by 3s or almost square. To change that, you select the image or the clip and go to the effects controls. And this is probably twirled up for you. So twirl down motion. And you'll see position, scale, rotation. These are the default settings that every clip has. So if you want to change the position, if you click and drag over these numbers, this is the left to right movement, and this is the top to bottom. This is X, and this is Y. So if I can drag this up, now when it plays,
It's always been in my blood, I think.
but it's a little bit boring. It's just a static image. Instead, we want to give the impression that this is more of a motion. This is more like a video. It's a motion picture, so that if you do a fake scale, it gives you the impression that the camera is pushing in. So this area here and this duration here are tied together. So here's what I do. I don't go to the end of the clip, because even though I'm on the end of the clip, I don't see it anymore. So whenever I'm adding keyframes, I set my keyframe and then I move them. What the heck is a keyframe? A keyframe is a number. It's a scale number, like 100% scale, or 50%, so it's half the size, or 200%, it's twice the size. Or it's a position of where something is. Every single object has a position and scale and opacity setting. So there are no keyframes here. And if I don't add a keyframe, then it won't change. Keyframes, animations happen when you have two keyframes. So we're going to set one scale property and then another scale property. The difference between the two is the animation. This makes so much sense when I just do it for you. So this is where I want the frame to finish. So I'll click on the stopwatch. You'll see it will turn blue and this little diamond shape will show up. So instead of moving this, I'll drag that to the end. So at the end of this clip, it will be whatever that is. There, 100%. And over here, let's actually zoom out. So I'll zoom in here first. That way you don't really see it. It's a little bit of a teaser. Did you catch what I did wrong? See, this is the kind of thing that I screwed up. Okay. I thought I was going to change position, but I'm actually changing scale. I didn't set a scale keyframe. This is just me being honest. I do this 25% of the time. Oops. So let me do it right. I'll just reset this back, add a scale, and drag that back over to there. And now I'll scale that in. So all I'm doing is I'm mousing over this, clicking and dragging. Or you could just type a number in. So let me scooch that up. And that's the kind of animation that we're going to have. I'll select these, drag them to the front. So there's two position keyframes and two scale keyframes. And this is what it looks like.
I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part of it.
So now we don't have a jump cut, we have B-roll. Let's play this back.
So it's always been in my blood, I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part.
That looks okay. I mean, I could tweak that all I want, but that basic idea of jumping to something else, having it move, and remember, we can have some nice music in there so that it's not just he stops talking and then there's an image. It's going to make sense in a little bit. And then we can keep doing that.
On the list.
So let's put in some video. Now this gets a little bit trickier because we've got an audio track to bring in and a video track. And that's where track targeting and source patching start working. Now the number one area that people get screwed up in Premiere Pro is source patching. If I click on a clip, and I'm going to use this clip here, you'll notice, I'm going to make my tracks a bit smaller. You'll notice V1 and A1 show up. If I go to the images, you'll see A1 disappears. There's no audio in an image, so A1 just disappears. there's audio in this clip and video in this clip. But if I accidentally turn off V1, I cannot bring in video. Premiere Pro expects you to know that. And quite frankly, this is what I found, is that for whatever reason, sometimes you didn't even touch it. V1 just goes woohoo and it shuts itself off. No problem. Just make sure V1 is turned on again and then you're dragging it in. Some people call this importing. This isn't. This is just editing. So if you don't have these in the right spot, so if you have them both A1 and V1 and you try to drag this in on another track, it's going to overwrite that track. So we've just deleted what was there. It's gone. We don't want to do that. You could protect this by clicking on those locks and now it's protected. But then the next time you want to chop this and edit it and move it, you have to unprotect it. So that's not a good workflow. It's better to actually track target, source patch, and track target. And for track targeting, if you right click in here and choose targets, follow inserts, and overwrites, then you don't have to move that too, because typically you would turn these off and turn that on. But when you have this set up correctly, when you drag it in and make sure your mouse is up to V2 and A2, now we've just dragged in a separate clip. And I'll hit play on this one.
And how it has more elephants than I've ever seen anywhere, including Africa and so forth. So I started exploring it. And
oh yeah, I forgot. He's talking about elephants here, and I'll show you in another cut in a second that I actually dropped in 2 elephant clips in there. But again, I'm hiding that jump cut.
traveling is, the way you travel is really...
Now that clip that I just brought in is too loud. We'll cover audio a little bit later. But basically you keep doing those same things. You're adding parts in, you're dragging in more clips.
And then basically we book it. Book my airfare and away I go.
I got some more camels here.
There are certain places which stand out primarily because of...
Now, this is all using the mouse, but you can be more precise if you use the source monitor. Let's show you that. Let's put this clip right here in this B-roll. I'll double click on it and load it in the source monitor. I'm not going to set any in and out points. I want this whole clip. And I want it to start about there. So because I've already got my track targeting, source patching is set up for V2 and A2, and I have this clip loaded in here, you've got these two buttons in here, insert and overwrite. And if you zoom all the way in and look at this, the difference between the two is insert moves everything down. So it inserts it, and it's like a ripple edit. Everything will move down. For a B-roll, we don't want that. We want the B-roll not to disturb the interview. So that's what this button is right here. And you can see they're both, the keyboard shortcuts they're beside each other on the keys. There's a comma key and the period key. So I'll click on this one, the period key. And you can see it showed up right in the right spot.
And I talk about the experiences that I've had in certain countries. I find when you're traveling, you experience...
Okay, so you just keep doing this and doing this and doing this until you end up with, let me open up my previous edit. Okay, so...
Never look back. I have always loved traveling, ever since that first...
I'll just show you each one of these little B-rolls.
So it's always been in my blood, I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part of it. There's no...
And I'm just going to go to my window menu, go to the audio track mixer, and I'm just going to turn
rhyme or reason as to what location I would choose. It just, you hear about some place.
Let's look at this
It
one.
has more elephants than I've ever seen anywhere, including Africa and so forth. So I started exploring it, and next thing you know, it was on the list. Travel.
So let me show you what I did right there with the elephants. So I've got two images, that image, that image. And remember, if we go to the effects controls, you can see there's the motion that we had. Same thing here. And I've got a cross dissolve in the middle. Remember, I added that fade up from black. When you add a cross dissolve to the lowest track, it's like fading up from black. In this example, the cross dissolve are between two of these clips.
And so forth. So I started exploring it, and next.
And to do that, I'll delete that. All I'm doing is selecting the edit point, just like I did before, Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows.
So forth. So I started exploring it, and next thing you know, it was on the list. Traveling.
And you see the end of this clip is at the beginning of this. So the edit is really hidden in here. And if I want to turn any track off, you turn off the eyeball, and that track is now hidden. So this is the jump cut.
It was on the list. Traveling.
So that jump cut is hidden, not by this covering it, but the elephant ends at that point.
It was on the list. Traveling.
So your B-roll jump cuts don't necessarily have to be over top of an edit. They just have to seem natural, that the B-roll ends when the next cut starts. So let's look at a few others in here. Now this one, I've got several images, and they're all doing the same kind of thing.
Basically, we book my airfare, and away I go. There are certain places which stand out primarily because of experiences that I've had. For example, I was in the Valley of the Kings, and I was taking photos illegally, which I didn't realize at the time, and I was being chased by guides guides from the site up into the mountains, and I ended up crawling into an abandoned cave, or I guess it was an old tomb, and suddenly there was noises behind me, and I realized that there was either a bear living in a cave in Egypt, or it was a people, and sure enough, it was a family living there, and they were very hospitable, gave me something to drink which resembled poi, if you've ever been to Hawaii. It was just an awful thing.
So a couple of things are happening there. We've got these images, and I picked them because they help reinforce his story about the Valley of Kings. So this is a bunch of images he sent me from there, and the blending of two, and I could take those transitions out if I wanted to. There's no right or wrong. You might like them as jump cuts. I like them fading in to each other very nicely. And then we've got the music, just naturally it dies.
Or it was a people, and sure enough, it was a family living there. And they were very hospitable, gave me something to drink which resembled.
So let's talk about dropping in the music. So let me get rid of these tracks. And the music is right here. So I'm dropping in those clips. Now, because there's no audio video, dragging them in is very easy.
Hear about some place. For example, 3 years ago, I had the pleasure of going to Sri Lanka, which is a country that I would never have thought of going to. But I was talking to some folks who are from there. They were showing me some pictures about how beautiful.
Now, I don't have enough, so I'm going to select this first clip. After I click on it, I'll hold the Alt key on Windows, the Option key on Mac, and drag it over there. So I've just duplicated it. Option or Alt clicking, dragging. After you start dragging, copies any media. So now this is the same music that continues on.
I find when you're traveling, you experience cultures, and that to me is the real key entire travel process, right from the guide that I meet through friends of his, people that just live in situations. 99% of the world is extremely friendly. I have not experienced any real issues with people anywhere I've been. I find them to be the same as you and I, just enjoying their life as best they can, trying to eke out a living, and knowing a different culture, but still with the same mandates.
Ooh, that's a nice positive message. Thanks, Jonathan. I like that. People are just nice all over the place. Okay, let's keep going. A couple more of these to see what I did.
So I just don't have that need anymore. Well, difficult is in the sense.
Now, the next B-roll image is he's talking about, I'll cue it up, and it helps to illustrate the point of what he's talking
do
about.
not get along, and you're in Azerbaijan on your way to Georgia, and the guide has to drop you off in Azerbaijan, and you have to walk a kilometer through no man's land with your luggage, and then go through customs in Georgia, and then you do the same going into Armenia. It's a little different, a little scary.
So no dissolves in and out. It's more of a straight cut, almost like you're going to a separate scene, but that scene really is an illustration of the landscape of what he's talking about.
Fine.
And another one
So I
here.
was, very, very obedient, and it was fine. There was no real problem. They're doing their job. My wife.
Okay, and you just keep going on with that, and refining it as you go on, adding that B-roll in there. Now, I want to talk about white triangles. You'll see this clip here has a white triangle on it at one side. That white triangle is showing you that you have media end. That's the end or the beginning of the media. There's no more beyond it. But this one there is. And if I keep dragging, you'll see that eventually I'll reach the limit and another white triangle will show up. I have to be honest that I never thought about those for 20 years until I was at an event and I made just a quick comment about, oh, everybody knows what they are. And a ton of people had no idea what those are. So the white triangles are not special. You don't lose them. Some people say, I lost my white triangles. You don't lose them. You have to keep dragging a clip out to see the media start and end. And you won't see those on subclips. That's completely different. But that's what they are. They just tell you you're at the end of the clip. And of course, all of the interview shots are smaller cuts, so we'll never see those white triangles there. Now you can mute a track also. So if I was playing, if I hit the M button, I've muted that track.
Through my mind. So I was, very, very
or that
obedient, and it was fine. There was no.
So let's say I don't want to go to a lot of trouble to remove those tracks, but I don't want to listen to them. I'm focusing more on what he's saying. So you can mute those, or I could have used the solo key.
No real problem. They're doing their jobs.
And the solo key will only play back what that track is, and I could solo 2 or 3 or 10 or what have you. If you add the shift key to any of these, locking, viewing, on and off, shift click will unlock all of them or mute all of them or solo all of them. So shift click and then shift click again will turn all of those off. This is really useful if you've got 10, 20 or 50 different tracks. How many tracks can you have? It's unlimited. Let's just go up to the top here and I'll show you. We've got quite a few tracks. And I've got a title over here, which I'll use in a second. But these tracks can be anything. You can add still images, video, graphics, animations on any of the tracks. And if you want to scroll up, I'm holding down the Control key on Windows, the Command key on Mac, and using my scroll wheel or changing the preferences. Remember our preferences, scroll wheel is horizontal. You could have changed it. But I want to show you that I could delete this track, delete track. I right click, delete track. To make a new track, all you have to do is drag something up there. So let's go back to our B-roll. And if I wanted to, I'm going to turn off audio because I just want to show you adding a track. If you drag something above tracks, it will automatically make a track for you. This is so useful. That way you don't have to know how many tracks you're going to have before you start. The default is 3 and 3, but you could end up with 30 and 2 if you want. Very easy to work with that. There's another one that's useful, and that's selecting forward. Let's say I didn't like I didn't like that the music died here too
in
quickly.
a cave in Egypt, or it was a people, and sure enough, it was a family.
So I want this clip here, and I want every other clip on, what's that, A2. I want to select everything from there all the way to the end of A2 and move it to where the playhead is. Well, what I can do is I can grab this, select track forward, and by default it's 2 arrows, so it selects everything. But if I hold the shift key down, then I'm track selecting forward that. So you can't move it with that one, but I could select it, then get the move tool and move it back. And what I've just done, if we zoom out and look, I'm moving that whole track, but the difference is I didn't have to zoom out. Track select forward is really useful if you're zoomed in and you're working on a bunch of things, but you don't want to have to zoom all the way out. Grab the move tool, select everything, zoom in, and move it back. Track select forward one track or multiple tracks. I like that one. I use that one a lot. Now you can just move a clip if you want, and you can see some of these clips I've moved in this edit. There's actually a hole in here because I wanted a gap in what was happening.
Countries. I find when you're traveling, you
So I have that gap because the music's filling it up and the ambience of this clip. So when you click on a clip, you can move that clip anywhere, but beware that when I drag it over top of here and drag it back, I've just deleted that. It's still there, I can drag it out, but there's no way to protect the clip you're dragging on. You drag on something and it will delete it. Same with going up and down. If I drag that up, it's going to delete that clip there. So, but you can easily trim those. So trimming is this red tool. And like I said, if you want the ripple trim tool, that's the orange one. The problem, you have to watch out though, if I ripple trim this, you see it won't let me because other media is affected. So I'm gonna have to lock everything else. And just unlock this clip. Now I can ripple trim this, and it's changing the whole time. You won't really see that unless I move out. So I'm ripple trimming this, and I could trim it backwards if I want. And all the rest of the clips are protected. The ripple trimming, it's best to lock the other tracks and then ripple trim that track. Now, admittedly, that's a very advanced kind of thing. Most people would just be trimming and moving clips on the timeline with the regular trim tool. Now, one last thing working in the timeline, and that's moving things up and down. You can freely move anything up and down. The one thing to be careful about is when you're moving a track with audio and video, one of those could delete adjacent tracks. So you have to be careful. What I tend to do is turn this button off here, linked selection. So right now, when I choose these clips here, the audio is also selected. And sometimes I don't want that audio to be selected. I just want this clip here. So I'll unlink the selection, select that. Now that those are selected, I could freely move them up and down. I can use the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, the Option key on Mac, and I'm using the up and down arrow to move this up. Now, if I go down and then back up, I've cut a hole in that. Let me show you how to fix that. This clip here, I can actually delete that and drag that back. Some people like to leave this off all the time. Some people like to leave it on. I leave it on and turn it off when I need it, when I need to just select one or the other. Now you can temporarily turn that off if you add the Option key on Mac and the Alt key on Windows. So now I have that on. If I hold the Alt or Option and drag this, I'm just selecting that. If I just select it without the Option or Alt, I'm selecting that. So depending on how you want to work, you can do it that way. All right, so, I mean, this is it's like drinking with a fire hose. I mean, there's a lot to learn, and I've got a ton of tutorials about ripple trimming and lots of things to edit, and you really got to get your feet wet, because what I would show you here is not necessarily what you would use in your edit. Everybody's is going to be a little bit different, but the same principles apply. You're starting with a timeline, you're dropping things in the timeline, and you're chopping them up. Okay? All right, let's go look at markers, and what are we looking at? Oh, yeah. Markers and transitions. Markers and transitions in the next section. Okay, you still with me? Yeah, let's get into a shorter part this time, and that's markers and transitions. So markers, some people swear by them, use them a lot. They're very useful. I use them primarily to remember a place that I need to come back in the timeline. That's really all I use them for. But let me show you what they're about. Okay, so a marker. There's a markers panel, and again, if you've closed it, you can go to the window menu and call up markers. You can also, as I mentioned before, double click on the editing workspace. And here's one of the dilemmas. I can't see it in here, but I do have the double-headed arrow. So if I click in here, it's way down there. So it was there, it's just so far over. There's a limit to how many things will show across the top of that, of the project panel with everything open. So there's the markers. There's nothing there yet. There's two ways to apply markers. I'm just going to zoom in again, hit ++. If I have nothing selected and tap the M key, then I will have added a marker, and you can see the marker shows up. Now, Adobe has a really powerful technique in that if you want to change the name of the marker and the duration, if you tap M again, when you have the playhead over a marker, it opens up the Edit Marker dialog box. And this is very useful. So if you just hit MM, it'll show up. So we could name this writing. I think that's what he's talking about at this part. You can add comments. You can also change the duration, and you can drag this over, or you can type in a number. You can change the color of the markers. And this is a comment marker. The rest of this stuff, don't even worry about it. Chapter markers were back in the day when you could create DVDs with Adobe programs. You can't anymore. And the rest had to do with web technology, especially Flash, which Flash is now dead. So really, it's just commenting that you're worried about. So when I click OK, the marker shows up. The more I zoom in, the longer it will be because I can see it. And at this point, I can drag that marker out if I want. Okay? Pretty simple. You can add as many markers as you want, so I could hit MM over here and add another one and do whatever I want. Now, if a clip is selected and you tap the M key, you'll add a marker to the clip. And if I open this clip by double clicking, you can see there's the marker. And same thing, hit M again, and I can add it. So you can have clip markers and you can have sequence markers, and they can have a range or they can just be a specific marker. Very useful for a lot of points. To me, when I'm editing my show and I've said something wrong, and I have to go back and correct it, and I've got a tutorial about replacing dialogue, I don't want to stop and go to all the work to find the right word and place it in. I'll just hit a marker and I'll type in the word replace with, and then I'll move on, and then later on I'll see that. Now, there is a markers menu, and down at the bottom, you'll see Ripple Sequence Markers is turned on. You want to make sure this is on. This is on by default. Remember when we were ripple trimming, you trim and then everything from the timeline moves down? Well, if you have timeline markers, you want those to move with it, or maybe you don't. If you don't, turn that off. You can also have sequence markers included with copy and paste. So when you're copying from one sequence to another one, it will paste in the markers or not. Again, you can turn those on or off. And there's a lot, all of the same kinds of commands that you can mark an in and out, mark a selection, because these are not just markers. The I and the O key, in and out, that's also in the marker menu. You're marking an area. So there's markers, and then there's an in and out point, which is also, you're marking that area. You can clear that area out by Control-Shift-X or Command-Shift-X on the Mac. And an in and out point is useful if you want to export out or copy out one little segment of that area. I won't go on too much about markers because, like I said, I have a whole tutorial about markers that's much more detailed. Let's talk about transitions because when they're used tastefully, they can be very good. So, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this,
I was born.
I wanted to put a transition in here. So if you move your regular move tool to the edge of a clip, it turns to the trim tool. And if you click in here, you'll add an edit point, Control D, Command D, and now there's my
I was born in the Netherlands.
cross dissolve. If you select the cross dissolve and go to the effects controls, you will see the control for that cross dissolve. So you can dissolve quicker or later, and you can also do that here. The one thing to keep in mind is if you're zoomed out, you can't easily click on the edge of that. Watch my tool change. See, from here to there, now I can edit that. So you have to be zoomed in at a certain point to be able to edit that transition. Is there more than cross dissolve? There is, but yikes. From a taste point of view, let me just show you one other one that I like to use. And this is another way to hide a jump cut. If it doesn't make sense for you to go to a B-roll, you know, this is much more narrative, but if you need to cut these points and you make it quick, here again, this is another jump cut.
It's not.
And you can see it's absolutely disturbing. They drive me crazy. Instead of a dissolve, which I'll show you what a cross dissolve looks like.
It's not.
Cross dissolve doesn't look good because their face is dissolving into their own face, and it's just way distracting. But a dip to black is really good. So let's go to our effects, and you'll see in the effects there's audio transitions and video transitions. Twirl that down, and you'll see things like motion, cube spin. Don't use that. Really bad, yucky. Dissolves, there's a cross dissolve, dip to black. And instead of going all the way down here, this is kind of like the same search that we did for importing our media. If I type D-I-P, dip, there's dip to black, so I don't have to go all the way down. On the right, you'll notice that this is also GPU accelerated if you have a fast enough GPU. If you don't, it's still going to be fine, but there is a little boost in there. So now you can drag this all the way over and drop it in. So watch this. And if you want to shorten that, because I think dips to black should be really short. Oh, not that short.
It's not.
If you double click on it, you'll get an actual number. So let's say 20 frames. And the way to read this is hours, minutes, seconds, frames. So obviously you don't want this to be hours. It's now 20 frames.
It's not.
Boom. It hides the jump cut, and it's a cleaner way to work. So if you have to have jump cuts, at least put a dip to black. You can have a dip to white instead. A dip to white is the same as a dip to black, except it dips to white. Just a creative idea. You can't change that color. It's either or, dip to white or dip to black. Now, I want to show you adding that to a bunch of clips. So I'm going to grab a new sequence. And again, let's images. And I've got that folder full of images. So watch this. I'll drag that whole folder into the timeline, / key. And now I've got a bunch of images, and they're just cutting one after another. Again, I'll double click to make that a little larger. There's a keyboard shortcut that I told you about, Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows, which is apply the default transition. If you select more than one clip and hit that, now you're blending between each one of these. If you add movement on top of that, remember the scale and position on top of that. So this is my example with music. So each one has a little scale and or position change with a dissolve over top of music. Pretty simple, and it just brings it to life. We've also experienced these pan and scan kind of examples. And if we click on any one of them, we'll see the keyframes here. Now I've got a tutorial about more natural animations. I'll link to that there. And that will give you smoother animations if you want. But this is a separate sequence from our rough cut. But if we wanted to, we could bring that in right to here. So let's say that we want the images in here and we want everything to move down, including the music. So I'll hit Command-Shift-K, Control-Shift-K. I now cut everything from top to bottom, regardless of how many tracks I've got, as long as they're not protected. This is the sequence here. I'll drag this in, and I'll hold down the Control key or the Command key. See how that adds those little arrows? And it pushes everything down, and now we've got our images showing up inside. So this is a nested sequence, and you can see it's colored green, and that's different from this. Everything in this images, I guess I should have named one something different. If you double click on this, you'll see all of the images in here. So this is a sequence nested into another sequence. This is really useful. I've got a tutorial about how to use this in a creative way. So you can apply transitions on a single clip. You can apply it on multiple clips. If you apply it on its own clip, like this over here, and I hit Control D, Command D, it actually puts a transition on the beginning and the end of the clip for you. So if you don't have an edit point, it puts them on both. If you have an edit point, it'll do that. So if you have the white triangles and you drop in a transition, you'll get a warning that because there's nothing after the triangle, it will have to duplicate all of the media. Again, I've got a whole tutorial about that in the white triangles. All right, transitions, editing, keyboard shortcuts. And again, you can go through all the transitions. Just be tasteful, be judicious. Don't just use any of them. Don't use the page peel. Dear Lord, and spinning weird ass stuff. It can make your stuff look really cheap and distracting if you start using lots of those. Okay, so that is markers and transitions. Let's go have a look at audio in the next part. All right, so you keeping up? Good? Learning lots, I hope. Wonderful. Thanks for sticking with this. Now let's get into the subject of audio. Audio can be a bit of a tricky subject, especially if you've recorded the audio yourself and it's not very good and you have to fix it. If you've got good audio, then the work in Premiere Pro is a lot easier. So let's look at both of those, fixing audio and also just enhancing audio. There's a whole bunch of effects that come inside Premiere Pro to help enhance audio, boost it, make it louder, and remove things like echo and noise. So we're going to look at that and the two different mixers that are in Premiere Pro. Okay, so let's talk about the tracks, because right now we've been dealing with stereo tracks. If we go back to our other sequence, you can see that this track has two of these waveforms in it, and this one also has two waveforms. These are called standard tracks. A lot of people will call these stereo tracks, but Premiere Pro just calls them standard because a standard track in Premiere Pro can contain both stereo and mono in one track. It's not right or wrong or good or bad, it's just the capability. Let me show you what it looks like when we have a mono track in here. Here's a mono clip, and I've opened it in the source monitor. You can see there's only one waveform. I also want to show you I've got no tracks down here for audio, but if I drag this in, a new track will be created for me. And if I open this up, you can see Premiere Pro created a standard track for me. It did not create a mono track when I dragged a mono clip in. And it'll play and it'll be in the middle. And this is another thing a lot of people don't understand is they hope that if they add a mono track, you can hear it in both ears. That's what mono is. These are stereo earbuds. You've got stereo headphones or stereo speakers. When you stick a mono track in, it plays equally on both sides. It sounds like it's in the middle. If you wanted to, I'm going to delete this track and I'll right-click and choose Add Tracks. If I choose Add Track, it'll make another stereo or standard track. I'll choose Add Tracks. I want 0 video tracks. And I want to show you that you can add a 5.1 surround sound, adaptive, or mono. We're just going to add a mono, and we'll add it after audio 1. Click OK. And you'll notice that it has this little speaker icon, and a standard track doesn't. So if I drag this in here, this is now a mono clip playing in a mono track. The little speaker is a way for you to see whether you're using mono or standard tracks. To be honest, in Premiere Pro, I just let Premiere Pro make all the tracks for me. I don't have I don't have requirements for things like mono, but just to let you know, worlds like the broadcast world, there are a lot of workflows where they don't want anything but mono tracks in. But for a lot of new users, just let Premiere Pro create the right track. Next up is the idea of volume. And you'll see that our audio tracks have these lines. And if you mouse over, you'll see that the volume level is 0 dB. Over on the right, I'm just going to play this so you can see
my
this.
phone more than a couple of times.
Picked up by the microphone. So you'll see that it starts down here at the bottom and goes to 0. These are all minus numbers. So you don't count from 0 to 100 in Premiere Pro for audio. In fact, in most digital settings, audio is always calculated at the top being 0, because if you go past 0, then it will crackle and pop and distort, and you don't want that. You want it fairly loud, but not popping above that. So these lines are your volume controls. If you want something louder, you just drag that up or drag it down. Another way to do this is with the audio clip mixer. And you'll see that when I move this up and down, it's going to move that up and down. Now, the interesting thing about the audio clip mixer is it has to do with where the playhead is. So you can see this is audio 1, A1. This is audio 2. I don't have a fader in here until the playhead is over top of it. Now I can do that. So you can either move the line or change the fader for per clip. But I want to tell you that that's a lot of work. The balancing of the audio can be done inside Premiere Pro fairly automatically. But if I was going to give you my suggestion, I use a separate program called Alex Audio Butler, and I have a whole tutorial on that. You literally drop it into the mixer and you let it do all its work. It uses artificial intelligence, and it just makes the whole audio track, the balancing. It doesn't do things like remove noise or reverb, but it balances things perfectly. It's as if an audio engineer worked on your track. But we're not going to, I'll show you applying that in a second, but there's a lot of tools in Premiere Pro. So let me get rid of this mono track for now. And also go over to the window menu and show you the audio track mixer. So the audio track mixer controls the volume of the whole track. So if I change this, it's not going to change that line. That's because you're looking at clip information. So each one of these clips has its own volume setting. The track itself is on top of that. So if I turn this all the way down and hit play, you won't hear anything. As I turn it up,
Protection, and it saved my phone more than a couple of times.
so it's an easy way to overall adjust the whole track. I've got tutorials on automating that. So you could actually add automation so the faders are moving up and down. That's way beyond a beginner's course, but that's one of the options. Up at the top, you'll notice a pan knob too. So if I play this and we pan, it'll echo all over the place, and it actually smears together. That's what you hear when you hear room tone. And so that's the ability to pan from left to right. So you can place audio sources all over the stereo spectrum. It sounds pretty cool. Now below all of the tracks is another track, and that's the mix track. That's what this is here. It's the mix track. Up in the track mixer, you'll also see the same mix track. This controls everything, and you can see it goes above 0. I would recommend you never touch that volume. Instead, you work on the tracks themselves and leave that at 0 dB. Otherwise, you could end up with something being too quiet or too loud on the way out. It's just best to leave the mix track alone. So let's talk about working with effects. So listen to this clip.
So to sum up this review, I love this phone case and I definitely recommend it. I love it because of the bulk that it gives my phone, and it's...
So you can hear there's a hiss in there. And this one, audio echo all over the place, and it actually smears together. That's what you hear when you... So that clip of me, I recorded using the microphone on my DSLR, so you can hear it bouncing all over the room. So let's go have a look at the effects. The effects are in this line here. They might be hidden behind and you look for your little double arrows. And if we look into the effects, you'll see audio effects. So control that down, and they're divided into categories. Amplitude and compression. So you've got things to amplify the sound. And then you'll notice some things that you might not be familiar with. A de-esser. What is a de-esser? Well, sometimes some people have, it's called sibilance. They have too much of a sizzle on their S, and this can remove that. It's very useful. There's compressors, delay and echo, bunch of filters, modulation, noise reduction, and restoration. Oh boy. Well, let's look at this one, denoise. And just like the other effects, with this clip selected, if I double click on this, watch what happens in the effects controls. It shows up in here. You don't really see much. You've got to click on this edit button, and now you'll see what it does. So let's just play that.
So to sum up this review, I love this phone case and I definitely recommend it. I love it because of the bulk that it...
So you'll hear the noise, the hiss is completely gone. It does affect the voice a little bit, but not enough that you would recognize this. In fact, on my show, I removed the hiss of my fan on my laptop, and there's a projector on the floor behind me projecting that image on the wall. There's a lot of fan noise, and I have a boom mic right above me. So I add that to my track mixer, actually. Let me play this, and I'll turn it on and off.
So to sum up this review, I love this phone case and I definitely recommend it. I love it because of the bulk that it gives my phone, and it's actually...
So it's very simple. You apply it and you can turn the amount up or down. Now I do want to give a shout out to a company called Sonos. This is actually their technology inside Premiere Pro. So if you want more advanced fine-tuned controls for working with audio, I'll have a link in the description to Sonos. Okay. So let's go listen to this guy, and let's stick the de-reverb on there. Same thing, I'll double click, edit. Audio echo all over the place, and it actually smears together. That's what, and there, if you click on this little presets, there's a couple of choices, heavy or light reverb. I'm going to choose heavy reverb reduction. That's what you hear when you hear room tone, and that's why it's so difficult to be able to fix that. And you've got a slider. I can turn this down. That because it's not a simple reflection. It's actually a bunch of sound waves smearing together by the time they you can turn it all the way up. Mouth, hit all these surfaces, and then get picked up. So you're walking a fine line between changing the audio quality overall. There's a certain tonality that happens. It's almost like a metallic kind of effect if you push that too far. And you really have to set your expectations. You're never going to get the sound of audio on a busy city street to sound like somebody recorded it in a quiet recording studio. That will never happen. Way too many people think that you can push a button and do that. You can't. You know what Hollywood does when they record on the street? They re-record everything later and they match the speaking. That takes a lot of work to do that. You don't want to do that. But this can really save you if you have been given a file that you have to fix, or maybe you recorded it poorly. You can fix it with things like de-reverb. Okay. So you can add all of these effects. So look at more of the effects. So you can add reverb. You can add other things in here like distortion. These are useful. Fill left with right and fill right with left. Remember I showed you the two waveforms? Sometimes for whatever reason you recorded on your camera, but the recording only put the voice or the dialogue or something in one side. You can use this to fill the other side. That's a useful one. And there's others for stereo imaging. You can expand the stereo. You can also shift the pitch. That is adding an effect to a clip. You can also add it to a track. So in the window menu, if we open up our audio track mixer, if you twirl this little thing down, it's easy to miss that. Twirl that down and then move over to the right, and you can see you've got a number of slots in here. Click in here. All of the same effects I just showed you are available as a track effect. So we could go to the noise reduction, denoise, double click on that, and let's choose light noise.
It's actually a two-piece case, so there's more protection.
So that's going to eliminate the noise on the whole track instead of one effect for each one of those tracks. The benefit to doing it in the track is you can change one effect instead of changing it over and over again. Because if you did apply this to, let's say, 50 different clips, you now have to change that in 50 different places. It's way easier to do that in the track mixer. And this is also where I would add Alex Audio Butler. So I have a whole tutorial on that where I would use it for voice. Double click on that. Tell it to use a constant source and natural. That's what you're hearing with my voice. You're hearing Acusonos remove the noise, and then Alex Audio Butler balances all the audio compression levels automatically for me. I love it. It's fantastic. I also want to show you the workspace up at the top that Adobe gives you. And here it is. It's called Audio. And when you click on that, it opens up the audio workspace. And what you'll get is this new panel called the Essential Sound Panel. Adobe has done a really good job making this easier for you when it comes to a bunch of audio effects applied. So let's go back to our rough edit. And I'm going to apply effects to these clips. And I'm going to use the Essential Sound Panels. So what the Essential Sound Panel wants you to do first is to select a clip or clips and then tag it. So I showed you a tool before called the Track Select Forward. Remember, it's the A key that selects it. If you hold the Shift key down, it's going to select all of these audio clips for me. So tap the A key, hold Shift, and click. So now I've selected all of the audio clips for the interview. Now in the Essential Sound, I will choose whether this is dialogue, music, sound effects, or ambience, and I'll choose dialogue. And then pick a preset like balanced male voice and hit play.
Into photography at a very early age and realized that the world is...
And you'll notice here, reduce noise is a possibility. So I could click on reduce noise.
It's quite the place to take photos and to explore.
And if we open up repair by itself, there's reduce reverb too. So they've put them all on a slider. So this is Adobe's way of simplifying all of the effects. It is a good way to work. Again, I try to keep on the track mixer because what you've just done is if you've applied one of the tracks and we go to the effects, you've applied denoise, vocal enhancer, graphic EQ, dynamics processing, and de-esser. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, let's say you had 50 clips. Well, you do the math. That's a lot of effects that are applied. Now, if you stay in the essential sound, you can move those sliders and affect all of them. So that's one way to work. Again, I prefer to do this all in the track mixer. So if I want to remove that, up in the top right, clear audio type, and hopefully they're removed. Yes, they're removed. I'm going to go back to my editing workspace. And open up images. Remember, this was our slideshow. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about quickly is voiceovers, recording your own voice directly into Premiere Pro. When you do that, you're going to want to use headphones or earbuds or something, because if you don't, the microphone will pick up the rest of the audio and it will create a problem. So the room needs to be quiet and you're only listening to your voice. So I've got earbuds in, I don't have my audio playing. So let's go look over here. You'll notice the little microphone icon. Before I click on that, right click in the same area and choose voiceover settings. And here you can see what you can name this. So I can name this Colin VO. I could pick the microphone that I'm using. I can choose a pre-roll and a post-roll. I'll turn the post-roll off. The pre-roll will count in 3 seconds and then it will start automatically recording. And you'll see there's the level right there, and that's because I've picked the right microphone. If you don't see that level, then Premiere Pro doesn't know what your settings are. You need to go to the Preferences, Audio Hardware, and pick your microphone. So I'm going to move this right here, and I'll push this button. It's going to count down, and then I'll start recording my voice. So these are some beautiful images that were taken by Jonathan through his travels through the years. And when I hit stop, you'll see it's recorded my voice. I'll just solo that. That S button is for solo. So these are some beautiful images that were taken by Jonathan. And if you look over on the left-hand side, remember I named mine voiceover, and there it is. So it's recorded a new clip and put it inside there. Notice I did not start recording my voiceover at the beginning. I do get comments by some people who try to do what I just did, and instead of the voiceover recording where I have the playhead jumps back to the beginning. I think you're just using an older version of Premiere Pro if that happens, because Adobe changed this in the last few versions, that it will record where the playhead is. So if I need to move further down, I just hit record again and keep going, and it will add another one. I don't think you're using the right version. If you are, and it's still a problem, hit the I key for an in point, and it's going to record from that in point, but it shouldn't be a problem. So that gives you a good you know, a basic idea. Audio can be a whole course on its own, but that gives you a basic idea. Like I said, I've got lots of tutorials with many different advanced looks at things like automation, noise removal, and a whole tutorial just on Alex Audio Butler that is unbelievable. Trust me, the comments I get back from some people that use it, they're like me. Wash your hands of audio. No more problems. I'll just drop it in every single time and it just works. All right. So I think we covered everything we need to. And next up, we're going to talk about effects. Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is a lot of fun, and that's effects. You can easily overdo things with effects in Premiere Pro. There's a ton of them. Some are useful, some are crazy, and there's lots of ways to apply them, use them, reuse them, and save them. Let's go have a look. In the effects, not the effects controls will change the effects. Let's go to the effects and go to video effects, and they're also, just like the audio effects, they're divided into categories. Things like the adjust category, where you can change things like levels if you're used to that in Photoshop, blur and sharpen, color correction, distortion. So here's a clip right here. If you have the clip selected and double click, so let's just put turbulent displace on this, and look at that. We've got this kind of warpy kind of look going on. You'll also notice that it doesn't play back perfectly well. It's kind of stuttery, but you still get the effect. Some of these have this little badge, some don't. Turbulent displace is not accelerated. The export's going to look fine. So just playing it back is going to be CPU based instead of GPU. If you don't know what that is, just your export will look fine. It just might not play back smooth, and it might take a little longer to actually render that when you're exporting it. So typically when you add an effect, it has a bunch of settings in here. Turbulent displace has a bunch of turbulence effects, like how is that turbulent? What is the setting here? You can see you've got twists and bulges, and then how much you're doing it. And you can add keyframes. That's what these stopwatches are. So you could add a keyframe for the amount, for the size, and warp the heck out of something very easily. You could also save effects. So selecting the name of the effect, including motion and opacity, you can right-click and save this as a preset. You can copy, you can paste this once you've copied it somewhere else. You can also just select it and delete it or turn it off. So it's very easy to work with the effects. They're all non-destructive, meaning that when you apply them, you haven't changed the video until you export it. That video can have the effect applied or taken off. Let's keep going. That was the distort category. You'll also notice, you can generate gradients, ellipses, flares. I've got lots of tutorials on all of this. Convert something to black and white. There's a whole bunch for VR video here. We're not really going to cover that. There's things like green screen keying. I have a whole tutorial on that. This is removing noise with dust and scratches or adding noise like HLS Auto. I've got tutorials on that. And then there's a whole obsolete category in here. It's best not to use those because eventually Adobe stops shipping those obsolete effects. It makes them obsolete for several versions for you to finish up your work, and then eventually you'll install a new version and they'll be gone. There's others for basic 3D. So here's one that's fun to play with, where you can swivel a clip around either horizontally or vertically, and you can tilt this. It's got some uses, definitely. Bunch of stylized effects in here, glows, embosses, time effects, echo effects. I've got a great tutorial on using this in a very stylized way to give you jumpy, crazy kind of video. Transform effects. Crop is a good one to use. Crop does exactly what it says. So if I turn the crop up, it starts chopping that out. So you could easily crop this video up into multiple pieces. You could crop videos, put them side by side. I've got a whole tutorial on creating split screens using crop and transform. And then there's some effects that are transitions that you could apply, and others that really aren't that important, like these utility ones or time code and stuff. So let's just create a blur effect on this video, and I want to show you how we can animate it over time. Animation happens when you have keyframes, which I'll show you in a second, that change over time. So we'll go to the beginning of this clip, and instead of hunting through, if we just click in here and type blur, there's Gaussian blur. Because the clip is selected, I'll double click and apply it. And Gaussian blur is pretty simple. It just has an amount. And if you turn that up, you'll see it start to blur. You can get rid of the dark edge by turning on repeat pixels. What I'm trying to do is recreate an effect of a camera being out of blur and then going into focus, called rack focus. So we'll start by blurring this. Let's blur it quite a bit at the beginning. Right now, there are no keyframes. If I click on the stopwatch, I've added a keyframe. So at the beginning, the clip is set to be blurry by 90. I'll move forward, and I can type in a number. I can drag left and right, and you can see it creates a keyframe. If I click this reset button, it resets it back to 0. So now when I go back to the beginning and hit play, that's what it looks like. It's a very useful effect, very interesting idea where you start blurry, because it's always interesting to tease people. You tease them with a little blur and then you focus in. If you want this to be slower, you just drag the keyframe slower, and now it's going to be slower. You can select both of these and move them around. So you can change it so that it's blurry until here and then it starts to unblur. But let's keep that at the beginning. Next up is saving this and reapplying it. And what I want you to understand is the duration between the clip and the effects control panel. This duration here, left and right, and the duration of this clip are directly tied together. When you move this playhead to the beginning, you're at the beginning of the clip. When you move it beyond the clip, now you're beyond the keyframes for that. So, I want to apply this same effect to this next clip here. And this clip, you can see, is much longer. But I want the blur to be the same between the two. Now you can just do this by selecting this copying and pasting. So this clip, the Gaussian blur, I could copy, select this, and paste it. And it's going to be the same blur. And there's nothing wrong with that. That works. But you can also select the clip instead of having to select the Gaussian blur. Just select the clip with the effects, copy that, go to the next clip, and you can use the edit paste attributes, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, or you can right click and choose paste attributes. And here you can see a list of everything that's applied to the clip I copied, and Gaussian blur is one of those. So when I click OK, I've now done the equivalent of that. This is also really useful if you need to paste attributes to a whole bunch of clips too, which could also be size information too, not just effects. Now I want to show you one other way to save this, and that's to right click on the effect or effects. You can hold the Command key on Mac, Control key on Windows, and click on as many effects. So you could create a whole stack of effects and save it as a preset. And I'll call this Rack Focus. And you have three options: scale, anchor to the in, anchor to out. So remember I showed you the second clip was longer? If I choose scale, the second clip is longer, so it will paste in the blur, but it will move the keyframe and scale it based on the clip. I'm going to choose to anchor it because I want it to be the exact same. Anchoring will keep it exactly the same and start it at the beginning. Anchor out is if I had a different effect going out. I could also write a description. Click OK. And now if we look at our effects and twirl down presets, and there it is. So that was the clip that I copied and pasted it on. I can now drag that over and it's the same thing. I've applied that. So very useful. One thing I will tell you you should do is right click on the presets and export your presets and find a place. If you've gone to a lot of trouble to tweak a bunch of things, occasionally Premiere Pro, if you have to reset Premiere Pro, which we'll talk about at the end, you could lose those presets. So it makes sense, maybe once a month, right click on that and just export your presets and just keep a whole bunch of them in there in case you have to import them later. All right, let's talk about masking now and isolating an effect on this guy. So let's add the blur on his face. So same thing as before, we'll grab the blur, apply it, I'll turn that up, and you'll notice 3 choices here. This is an elliptical mask, a polygon, or a pen. If I click on the ellipse, it's going to keep the effect just in that area. And we can resize this mask so that it's around his face. If you move to the middle, you can change where this is on his face. And you can do things like feather the mask. You could expand the mask so it's larger or smaller. And now when I deselect, you see the blur is just on his face. If he moves too far, then you're going to have to add keyframes for the mask path. There are controls here to track forward, track 1 frame, or track backwards, forwards, or 1 frame forwards. If you click on the little wrench, you can tell it whether you're tracking position, rotation, or position, scale, and rotation, and turn on or off preview. If you preview is off by default, it's much faster to calculate. I want to set your expectations. This tracker is not very accurate. Many times it will actually lose what it's tracking. So if you're trying to track his face and you don't have preview on and it takes 5, 10, 20 minutes, you might be sitting there waiting, thinking that Gaussian blur is tracking perfectly, only to find out when Premiere Pro is finished, the Gaussian blur is like way back over on the other side. And that's just the state of the tracker. It's just not that good. Let me just show you quickly how you can manually track. It's a pain, but at least you could do it. If you click on the mask path, and by the way, the mask is constantly becoming deselected. I hear this all the time. My mask, I lost my mask. You didn't lose it, it just became deselected. So click on the mask path, there's a keyframe there. We'll move ahead. He's not moving that much, but I just want to show you, you can move this and it adds another keyframe and it adds another keyframe. So you can manually track it. What you'll notice is that if something is moving quite a bit, the tracking is going to not be as accurate. We're way too used to Hollywood style. It's called rotoscoping. When you cut someone out of a background, that is really freaking hard, really hard. I'm not talking a little tricky, I'm talking unbelievably hard. I've got a tutorial about working with masks in something like After Effects. If you really want to pursue that, then use Mocha in After Effects, or even better, Mocha Pro, which is a separate program you have to buy, and it does amazing rotoscoping. It's still really hard. I just want to set your expectations. You're not about to import any video, push a button and remove the background and rotoscope. It ain't gonna happen. But let's get fun. Let's add something to this guy here. I want to track this guy. And I'm going to add mosaic effect to this. And we'll make this a little bit bigger. And the effect I want, I'm going to grab this shape. And what I'll do is I'll follow him all the way to the end as if the mosaic is trailing behind him. Now there isn't a nice little handle here, so you have to click and drag and hold the shift key. I wish there was a handle. There's not. So let's add a mask path to this. And you see how the mask became deselected as soon as I added a keyframe? This is just one of the peculiarities that will frustrate you. You add a keyframe, it deselects the mask. Yikes. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the scroll wheel, or you could use your trackpad, and I'll move backwards, and then I'll hold the shift key, because that means I'm moving in one direction. And you can see how it's adding keyframes. If you tap the tilde key to make this bigger or maximize this frame, then you can see it a little clearer. Now, I'm not following him in, the perfect shape that you would expect. And again, that would take rotoscoping. If I really wanted to be accurate, I would have followed his body, but he's pretty small. I just want to give you an idea of what this kind of thing looks like when an effect changes based on an isolated area. All right, so now you can see the mosaic follows along as he comes in. And that could have been any effect. That could have been a blur or a color change. It could have revealed something else. So have fun with effects. Let's talk about a very useful effect, and that's Warp Stabilizer. Warp Stabilizer will stabilize your footage, and it will also scale the footage because well, I'll show you. I'll turn scale off and show you why that works. So you can see this camera is moving a little bit. And I want it more stable. So I'll select the clip, and in my effects, I'll type Warp ST. There's Warp Stabilizer. Double click, and it's going to start analyzing this in the background. You can continue working while this is going on. And it finished that quick. This is dependent on the power of your computer. A really slow computer, it's going to take longer. A very long clip, it's going to take even longer. Okay, so now if we look at this, we can see it's much more smooth. And I'll turn this off so you can see it as an example. And that's back on. If you look at the Warp Stabilizer settings, you can see you have smooth motion or no motion. This is smooth motion. I'll show you no motion in a second. You can also look at the framing. So there are several choices: stabilize, stabilize and crop, stabilize, crop, and automatically scale. So let's just stabilize and crop. And now I'll play this back. Actually, let me just stabilize. And this gives you a better idea of what's going on. So the black edges are because to stabilize this, it's scaled it down and it's moving it around. So when the original camera operator jerked the camera to the left, Warp Stabilizer converts it to the right. And it's not just changing XY position, it's doing incredibly calculations, because no one moves a camera, a lens perfectly on a subject at 90 degrees. You've got some yaw and move like this, then rotation, and it's removing that. So now when I put scale on, you don't see the black bars, but the video is scaled up. So If you want to do what the professionals do, if they know they're going to stabilize something, they actually shoot a little further away. That way, when it crops and zooms, it's going to look good. Now, let me show you no motion. So in this clip, there's very little motion. But what I want to do is emulate as if this was shot on a tripod. So let me turn off warp stabilizer and show you. Lots of movement there. So warp stabilize smooth looks like this. If I change the motion to no motion, you can see it's restabilizing it. Now look at this. I'm just going to make this larger. Look at that. Now that looks like it was shot on a tripod. That's really useful if you can't carry a big tripod with you, yet you want these shots. Maybe this is a travel log and you want nice, solid shots. You don't want them moving around. So stick your elbows into your sides if you're shooting with a DSLR or anything you're bringing to your face. But if you stabilize that by sticking your elbows in, holding that tight, you'll still move around. Warp stabilizer, no motion. Now it looks like you carted a big old tripod all day. The last thing I want to show you with warp stabilizer is if you've added a clip to a sequence that doesn't match the pixels. Warp stabilizer needs to have the exact same pixels and frames and everything. So watch this. This one, there's a lot of motion. I'm walking around, boom, 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 boom. If I apply this, I'll get a warning. Warp stabilizer requires clip pixel aspect ratio to match. Fix by nesting. Oh, that's good. So I'll remove the warp stabilizer on there, right click, and nest this. And I'll call this Seawalk. And you'll see it'll change green. A nested sequence is a sequence that's been brought into a different timeline, so it's nested inside. Now when I add warp stabilizer, it's going to stabilize it. Takes a little longer, okay, for this clip. All right, and it's done. Now, I also picked this clip because I wanted to show you every single time that I'm stepping down, it's blurring, and it blurs because the shutter speed and the movement of my foot hitting and the camera jiggling, that blur is actually in the footage. What you will find sometimes that when you stabilize something, you'll see blur sometimes in the footage. You might think it's an artifact added by warp stabilizer. It isn't. It's in the footage. You don't see it as much because the footage is moving around and your brain doesn't recognize it because it's part of what we see, because we see moving footage all the time. But as soon as you stabilize it, now it sticks out. It doesn't mean that the warp stabilizer is wrong. It's just now doing something that isn't natural. So you have to pay that price. After Effects actually has a way to remove that blur. Okay. So again, this is just a beginner's look at effects. They're easy to apply, save, reapply, and adjust and change over and over again. I have countless tutorials on different ways of using effects that you can check out. All right, so next up, next up we're going to talk about color. Okay, are we ready for the next section? Hopefully you're doing okay. You've had a few breaks and you're starting to have this stuff seep into your brain. Let's talk about color, which is both fun and infuriating. It is a fun subject because we can really play with the color very easily in Premiere Pro. It can be infuriating when you're trying to balance something and it just does not work. So let's talk about balancing color and getting creative, and then also talk about scopes, because it takes years and years and years to really be able to see color correctly. And I wouldn't even put myself in that category. And one of the problems in working with color is everything is relative. So if you're looking at a clip that looks bright, if it's near a whole bunch of dark clips, it might look bright, but it's not really bright based on the overall luminance or how bright the clip is. That's why Premiere Pro has scopes, and the scopes will help you recognize where the color is and if you have any problems. I have a whole tutorial on how to read the scopes. They're very powerful. Your brain is also influenced by color around you, and a typical colorist will be in a neutral room with neutral lighting, and very few of us have that. If you've got sunlight pouring in, that's affecting you. If you've got fluorescent lights, they're green, and colored walls, lots of things. So trust the scopes. So the first place to start in Premiere Pro is the color workspace. It's an excellent place that gives you all the tools you need. Let's go have a look. Color workspace up at the top. And just like before, double click on that workspace and it's going to reset everything for you. Now, when you open up your scopes the first time, I think that's the default. You actually have 3 different scopes, and I think there are too many. Like I said, I've got a detailed description of these, but let's turn off this vector scope, turn off the waveform, and use this RGB parade. RGB, red, green, blue, parade, because there are 3 of them. And the reason they're side by side is it's easier to isolate just the green or the blue or the red. It doesn't mean the red is on the one side and the blue is on the other side. It just means they've been moved apart and they're actually squished together because they're inside a 9 by 16, a 16 by 9 panel. But it's easier to recognize them. So trust me. I also want to show you the numbers 0 to 100. Or on the right, 0 to 255, which is 256 levels. That's just 2 different ways of reading color, digital or just a 0 to 100, whatever you're used to. The top is the brightest, the bottom is the darkest, and the middle is the mid-tone. If something is below 0, it's going to be totally black. If you push more stuff down, then more of it will be black. Usually that's not a good thing. That's very specialized. If it's all up at the top, then it's going to be very bright. So it will change based on the clip. So I'm going to move my playhead, and you see the difference here. Look at that, all the way up at the top. That's this very bright sky over here as opposed to this sky, which is very medium and blue. Okay, so over on the right-hand side is the Lumetri Color Panel. And these are the choices that you have. Basic, creative, curves, color wheels, secondaries, vignettes. I have a whole playlist where I go deep inside. Let's concentrate on some simple things like the basic section with neutralizing this. So when I open up basic, it gives us simple tools. If you come from Adobe Lightroom, you're going to love this. This is a lot of the exact same things where it takes a setting and puts it on a slider. And the first thing you'll see is an input LUT. Don't use this. This is only for people who shoot with a specific camera and they're shooting raw or log and they need to apply a LUT. That's probably not you, probably not me. Keep going. There's a white balance selector, and that's this eyedropper here. This is an easy way to balance something. So if you see something in the clip that should be white, and it's hard to know if these buildings like that is probably off-white. Let's say that this part of the boat should be white. So I'll grab the eyedropper and click on that part of the boat. And you'll see the settings changed, and you'll see this has jumped. So now the red is lower. And if you click on the little effects, you turn this on and off. So you can see it's a cooler image, and it is more neutral. Even though the red is lower, it is neutral because this was shot a little bit redder, and it most likely was the time of day, but you can neutralize that. You don't have to, but the reason basic and the white balance selector is at the top is because that's the typical workflow, where you will balance a clip first, then you will get creative after that fact. I'm going to reset this by clicking up here and show you what happens when I move these manually. So notice that they're moving like a teeter-totter. The green is pretty much staying the same, but blue, and when I move this to blue, the blue is moving up. When I move this to the orange, the red is moving up. I want to show you a color wheel because this is very simple color science. This is really simple. Let's go down to the color wheels and look at them. And you can see there's blues and there's that orange red. They're the opposite. So when you increase blue, you're actually decreasing that orangey red. That's the way color works. You don't have to know the science behind it. You just have to recognize that, hey, if I've got too much blue, move that slider away from the blue and you'll see the red show up. So if you were forcing this into not a neutral, but into more of a golden hour kind of look, you could do that. And then the green and the magenta are just the opposite. We go back to our color wheels. There's green and there's magenta. They're the opposite from each other. It's just easy to have these on sliders. Again, if you come from Lightroom, this is going to make a lot of sense. Next up, notice that there isn't a lot at the top, although this is a bright daylight shot. It was just shot at a darker exposure, so we could change the exposure. Don't push it too far because you're going to blow it out, but here we could push that exposure up. Go up to the top and turn this on and turn this off. You can also use things like contrast, which is pretty simple. You drag this up and you can see the contrast is increasing. Double click on any of these to reset them. Then there is highlights and whites, shadows and blacks. The highlights are near the top. The whites are right at the top. So you can push that and stretch it out. And you'll notice the scope as I'm doing that, the scope is stretching the waveform out. You're increasing the dynamic range. It's as if you shot it differently instead of shooting that range. Again, here's the shadows, and closer to the bottom is the black, so you can push that all the way to the back. Below that is saturation. Anytime you start working with the contrast and pushing the contrast, you've also increased the saturation. So if you want that, great. You could saturate it even more, or you could pull that saturation down. And I'll turn the effect off and on. Off, and we thought that that was bright before, and now you look at it, now it looks bright. That's the idea of everything being relative. And a great colorist would look at that and they would instantly know. If you asked them to draw a picture of the scopes, they'd probably get it right. That's not you and me. That's somebody who is a colorist as their job. They can recognize these things. Doesn't mean they don't use scopes. They still count on the scopes and look at that. Okay, so let's talk about creating a look. Here's our wheel guy, he's again, and then we'll apply it to different clips. And I'll show you an interesting way to do that. So this is overly green. It's very blown out. It's shot in a specific way. It's gritty. If we wanted to push this more towards the magenta, maybe not that much. Do we want to lift the blacks a bit? Maybe we'll lift the blacks or lift the shadows, but push the blacks down. And then I'll go to the creative section, and in here we've got a whole whack of different LUTs and looks. I've got a whole tutorial on this. If you Google LUTs, L-U-T, look up table is what it stands for, oh my goodness, you will find thousands of them that you can load into Premiere Pro and play with them. And you can load them easily by clicking on the drop down, clicking browse, and then finding that locally. But there's a ton of different ones in here. If you click on the right arrows, it's going to preview them before you apply them. And you can see there's a bunch here that are based on different film stocks. I want to get something that's a little bit warmer. There we go. Gold heat. Click on that. Very extreme. There's the before, there's the after. You can see it really stretches out and it gives this very stylized look. Now, these were shot with the same camera. What if I wanted to apply them here? Well, as you saw in effects, I could save a preset, I could copy paste attributes, but let's talk about using this as an adjustment layer. Back over in our, I might have to open this up a little bit. Back in our project, this little button here, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Click OK. It becomes selected. I'll drag it to a track above, and I'll drag it out. Right now, it's not doing anything because I haven't applied an effect, an adjustment layer. If you apply effects to the adjustment layer, it affects everything below it. So let me select that first clip. There's the effect, the Lumetri color effect, which, by the way, the color settings that you do are actually creating a Lumetri color effect. So I'm going to, instead of copy that, I'm going to cut that, and then I'll select the adjustment layer and paste that. So now that's going to be applied to all of those clips on the adjustment layer. It's great because you can easily change the one adjustment layer and it changes the look of all the effects. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is a master clip effect versus a clip effect. So I want to make this very obvious. So let's go back to our basic correction, cool this down, change the exposure, and crush the blacks, and make this less green. Okay, so we have this Lumetri effect, and you'll notice in the effects controls, there's this right-hand section and a left-hand section. This is the master clip effect. So I'm going to take this and cut it. And again, I could save a preset or copy it, but I want to remove it completely because let's imagine this clip is cut multiple times. So that would mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 effects that I have to apply to this. Or if I click here and paste this in as a master clip effect, it's now applied in every instance of this. And you can see there's a special badge down here with a red line underneath it. This is what I do for my show. So when I take this clip into Premiere Pro, I already have, because I have the same lighting, same camera and setup, I already have a preset saved and I apply it as a master preset because then I chop it, every time I go to my talking head, it's cut, 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 cut. So master clip effects can save you tons of time. Can you change them? You can, but you have to be careful. Watch this. If you go back to the Lumetri color, you'll see the right-hand side is always selected. If you want to change it, you have to click here, then make a change, and now it's changed every one of these. If you go back to the Lumetri color panel, it will always re-select the right-hand side. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind, because if you don't, You'll forget you're doing a master clip effect change. You'll click on the Lumetri Color Panel. You'll change the clip effect. You'll wonder why that effect didn't change for all the other clips, because you actually added another Lumetri color effect on top of it. It's a little tricky one. So with, great responsibility comes great power. You've got the power of the master clip effect, but you have to be very conscious of always editing the master and not the other one. Okay, so how are we doing? Great. Color, we could go on for days and days and days. I have a whole playlist of all the things you can do with color. But now you have a basic understanding of where the color panels are, what the scopes are, and how to change them and affect them. All right, next up, let's talk about titles and graphics. Okay, we're on to titles and graphics now, and usually this is the point where the video editing and all the rest of the stuff is done, and now we're starting to dress it up with some graphics and titles and things like that. There's a ton of titles that come directly inside Premiere Pro that you can download, either paid or free. With one caveat, Adobe just calls them MOGRTs, and so does the whole industry. Motion graphics templates, MOGRTs for short. The After Effects MOGRTs, some of them that are very complex can be slow. So if you did buy a bunch of these and you're wondering why they're really slow, well, it's slow because After Effects is slow. If they're made in Premiere Pro, then they're usually a lot faster. I've made a ton of titles that you can get, and I'll have links. You can go to the VideoRevealed.com store and buy them. But I like titles that are built in Premiere Pro because they're much faster. So let's show you how we can build a simple lower third, how titles work, how we can save them, load them in. Then I'll show you where you can download a bunch of free Video Revealed titles. So up at the top in our workspace, there's a graphics workspace. I want to show you, before we click on that, here's our tools right here, specifically the text tool and the shape and pen tool. When I click on graphics, those tools will now be over here, just a little bit closer, because you can draw right directly in this window. On the right-hand side, the Essential Graphics panel opens up, and this is where you can choose load a bunch of titles, which we'll look at in a second. This is where I've saved all of my titles. You can also jump to Adobe Stock. The Edit button is where we create them. So there's nothing here right now. You can create by using this little new item and create new text, rectangle, ellipse, or from file is a clip. And the from file can be a still image, it can be a graphic, a transparent graphic, a logo, Photoshop file, Illustrator file, it can even be a video, and it will be inside the Essential Graphics panel, and you can manipulate it there. I want to show you the simple tools underneath the pen tool. So if you click and hold, you'll see the pen tool for drawing shapes, rectangle tool, and ellipse tool. I'm just going to grab the rectangle tool and click and drag a rectangle. As soon as I drag it, on the right in the Essential Graphics, you'll see a bunch of settings that show up. I still have the rectangle tool, so if I click on anything, I'm going to be making new rectangles. So you might want to grab the selection tool, which is the move tool. And some of the settings are the alignment. For instance, if I wanted this aligned perfectly in the middle, now it's absolutely in the middle of the frame. This is great when you're creating a big title. You can also use these to align things vertically or horizontally with other objects. Right now it's going to align with nothing because I have nothing selected. It's aligning to the actual frame itself. These are the position controls. If you look to the effects controls, you'll notice a few things. First of all, there's a new setting called vector motion. Vector motion only shows up when you have an Essential Graphics title. Adobe calls these Premiere Graphics. They call them MOGRTs, Motion Graphics Templates, when they're outside of Premiere Pro, but once you import it, they'll call it Premiere Graphics. Here's where our motion settings are with position. There's the vector motion with position, and then there's the shape with position. Which one is right? Well, there is no right or wrong. It depends on how you're working with it. The position of the shape can be animated, or it can just be a position, and then you can change the overall position with vector motion. The good thing with vector motion, and I have a whole tutorial on that, is it's infinitely scalable. So you can blow things up and have text look huge, and it will never have those jagged edges on that. But let's stay over here on the right-hand side. So each one of these is going to come in on a layer, and you can change the order by dragging them up and down. There's colors down at the bottom. If you click on the fill swatch, you can pick a new color, just like any typical Adobe application. You can add a stroke onto this. You can click on the plus and add another stroke and change that color and make that larger, and that shows up like that. So lots of ways to customize this. You can put a drop shadow on here. It's very useful. And if you wanted to animate this, that's where we're going to go over to the effects controls, twirl down that shape, and now we can animate any of these properties. And if you looked at if you remember the keyframes from my effects, it's the same thing. I'll set a position keyframe, move further ahead, and I can either drag these numbers or move it around here, and now it's going to move on the screen. If you go part way in between and drag that over there, now you've added 3 keyframes. So lots of ways to animate this and play around with it. So let's import a logo into this too, and remember, I could choose this and choose from file. There's also a graphics menu where you can choose new layer from file. It's the same thing. You can also drag over to the Essential Graphics panel. I'm just going to search for the logo. So there's the Photo and Travels logo. It's already imported in, remember when we started? So I can drag this into this Essential Graphics panel, and now it's another graphic that I could animate and change any way I want. And this can be any graphic that you're dropping in, and any number of different graphics, and you can have them all animate and change the stacking order. So we could put this over top of it, or we could put it below it, however you want to work, depending on the graphic that you're making, however you're doing these titles. All right, so let's create a lower third for Jonathan, and we'll have a little bit of simple animation, and then save that as our own Mogert. You'll notice down in the timeline, when I made that original shape, it created this here. What's important to notice is that it won't show up in the left-hand side. The old titler in Premiere Pro used to create Premiere titles and put them in there, but the new Premiere graphics only show up on the timeline. That's why backing these up is essential. If I've gone to all the work to create something, I'll immediately back it up in 2 places, locally and as a library. I'll show you that in a second. So let's get rid of these. And actually, let's grab the type tool and click. And I've already copied his name, so when I paste, his name shows up down at the bottom. Same as the other shape with the addition of font information that you can have styling. But one thing that's great about type in the Essential Graphics is this button here to turn on a background. And you can change the overall opacity and the spread or the distance from the actual object. So the longer the name, the bigger the background. So this is easier than drawing a shape and then typing a name and aligning them. The background just moves with that in one object. Very nice. And you could click on the background and we could change it to any color we want. I'm going to leave it as a dark blue against the white type. So in the effects controls, I'll twirl down the text I don't need the source text, but we're going to change the position. So the way that I like to animate is I always like to go to the second position or the resting state of the animation. So I'll typically hit the playhead and then hit the playhead again as an estimate of how fast I want that title to move. So I just found that was good. So I'm going to click here to add a position keyframe that says that this title at this point is in this position. Next, I'll drag this back to the beginning of the title, and I could either type a number here, I could click and move it here. It's just a little bit easier. You don't want the title, you want it to move smoothly into the side. You don't want it to go. So I think it's easier to drag the position X coordinate to the left. And if you add the shift key to that, you'll drag it quicker. So I'll put that out, and this is
New
how
Zealand,
it goes.
South Africa,
pops out on
or
the screen.
Canada. And
I'm just going to move this up to V3 so it doesn't bump into anything else. Move it over here.
to move to a different
So it
country.
comes out on the
Our
screen.
choices were New Zealand,
And right now it's just
South
sitting there,
Africa,
and when it
or
ends, it
Canada.
disappears. I'm going to extend this amount. What I wanted to do is to hold for a while and then back out. I want to show you a typical error that happens in animation where you think it will do one thing and it'll do the other thing. It's a real simple fix. Okay, so let's look here. So it starts on the left,
To move to a different country.
pops
Our
over to
choices
the
were New
right,
Zealand, South Africa, or Canada.
and
And we
here's another one of my tips. I want the title to go all the way out at the end. And what some people will do is they'll move the playhead to the end. The problem is, if you do that, it disappears. So what I do is I move the playhead earlier, and if I copy this keyframe, remember that keyframe is already on the outside. So if I copy that, copy, paste, I've now pasted that keyframe so it exits out. If I want this at the end, I'll just drag that to the end. Oh, that makes it better. So now it goes
Canada and
all the
never
way
look
out.
back.
But I want to show you one of the errors. We have 3 keyframes here. We need 4. Let's find out why.
To move to a
So
different
here
country.
it is. It pops
Our
in,
choices were
and
New
oh
Zealand,
boy,
South
oh boy,
Africa,
it's immediately
or
going
Canada.
out. That's because we've already set the next keyframe to exit out of the frame. So as soon as it comes in, it's going out. So if we duplicate the second keyframe, it's going to hold. Very simple. We'll select that keyframe, copy and paste. Now it's going to hold between these 2 keyframes.
To move to a different country.
It is.
Our choices were New Zealand,
Now it holds.
South Africa, or Canada.
Waits.
And we chose Canada and
And then it takes
never looked
off.
back.
To make this a little bit more interesting, if you right-click on that first keyframe, temporal interpolation, ease in. Temporal, huh? Time changes. So the time changes, you just changed how time works. And instead of it being a digital movement of perfect 0 to 100, now it eases in. Same thing to the next one, ease out. I'm just going to move that down a little bit. So now we should see it move a little bit
To move
smoother.
to a different country.
Boom.
Our choices were
Holds
New
in,
Zealand, South
and now it'll
Africa,
smoothly
or
move
Canada.
out.
And we chose Canada and
Pretty nice. What happens if you need to change the name and it takes longer to read and you want the title to be longer, but you want the animations to stay the same? This is called responsive design time, and it's absolute genius by Adobe. Look at this. Up at the top, there's a little blue handle. Drag that out to the area that includes the animation. This tells the title where the beginning and the end are. And if you look at this, you'll actually see that same shaded area here. So if I drag this longer, then the duration
and we chose Canada and
of
never looked back.
the exit and intro animation
I have always
will stay
loved traveling.
the same.
Ever since
If I want it to be quicker, I'll drag it down.
Move to a different country.
Now it's
Our
quicker,
choices were
it
New
holds.
Zealand, South Africa, or
Out
Canada.
it goes. Now you might notice that this area, which is supposed to be the same as this area, it gets a little mixed up. If you drag this over, it refreshes this sometimes. It's a little bug. But here's the other great thing about this. Hold the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, drag this out. World Traveler. Is that how you spell traveler? I think. So now we've got two titles. They both animate the same, but they're both independent. Okay. Like I said before, I want to save this. I've gone to this trouble to make this title, and I want to reuse it maybe in a different show. Okay, so you can go to the graphics menu and choose Export as Motion Graphics Template, or you can right-click on it. You might need to zoom in a little bit more. Right-click and choose Export as Motion Graphics Template. And I'll just call this Jonathan Lower Third. You can choose a local drive, or you could put it into a library. So I'm going to stick it in Collins Library. I would be careful with including a thumbnail. Something like this isn't that bad, but if it's a big, long animated title, it's going to actually create a video animation and embed that. You can also warn if it uses fonts that aren't available with Adobe Fonts. Warn it if that uses effects not included with Premiere Pro, and warn if it's not compatible with Rush, and you can put some keywords in there. So I'm going to click OK. And now when I go to Browse, and I'm browsing my templates, not the Adobe stock, there it is. Drag it in. And there we go. So I wouldn't, if I was going to save this, I would put first last instead of his name, so I could reuse that very easily. But libraries are a great way to work. Let me just go quickly to and show you that in my library. Here's a whole bunch of there's the credits at the end. There's a bunch of backgrounds that I've created. There's my special note. If you've ever seen that show up in my show, if I have a special note, it animates, pops up on screen. All of that is created with Premiere Pro. There's no After Effects involved. Each one of those pieces is part of that animation. So if you go back to browsing, and you can see there's a whole bunch of these effects. There's a big breaking news.
I've always loved traveling. Ever since that first
And I've got tickers that you can use. So here's a perfect one. This is the travel ticker.
or at least
which a
write
little-
it properly. And I found that very
A little plane flies up.
So this was before there was televisions in the
And then
back
the
of every
ticker
seat.
goes
So
across the bottom.
consequently,
You can buy those from our
consequently,
store.
I started to
If you want a bunch of free stuff, then go to the Adobe stock and type in Video Revealed. Give it a moment, and you'll see a bunch of my titles show up in there, like the heart eyes emoji. Again, no After Effects in this at all. This was all created completely with Premiere Graphics. Some transitions in there and some other cool stuff. There you go. There's a look at titles. I think they're really useful and very powerful. Two ways to work with them. You can either use After Effects Mogurts, which are way more sophisticated and can have, motion graphics in them that are just eye-popping, but you're going to pay the price of something that's going to be a bit slower, or use a whole bunch of stuff right in Premiere Pro and make it faster. Okay, we're on the home stretch now. We've gone through quite a bit. I know smoke's probably coming out of your ears, but a couple of things to finish up. The next one is talking about exporting video. All right, how we doing? Good, good. Glad you're still here. Let's talk about export, either exporting out your final or exporting out trial versions or in and out points. There's lots of ways to do it. Basically, you can export out using Premiere Pro or using Media Encoder. Media Encoder is like the rendering engine of Premiere Pro, but without all the editing capability. You can run it in the background and can export a whole bunch of files and queue it up. Premiere Pro will export one at a time, but Media Encoder will export out multiple times. Now, Adobe added a quick export, and I use it now. Every single time I export out for YouTube, I use the high bitrate version that's in the top. There are a limited amount of presets right now, but for sure Adobe's going to come up with a way for you to save your presets in quick export. Let's look at that first. And also remember, you have to have the right panel selected to have export things perform correctly, because Premiere Pro can export out of the project panel and also out of the timeline, and you can have multiple timelines. So let's select our rough cut here. This is what we want to export out. In the top right, quick export, click on that. A small menu comes up. This is where it will be exported to, so you can find any location there that you're exporting to. Below that are the presets, and then here's a quick check to make sure that you're exporting the right settings. Here it's H.264, 1080, 1920, 1080, 2997. These are the formats that I want to use. If you want to change them, you can go into this menu and pick either medium or low bit rate or some other common ones. Think of these as YouTube 4K, YouTube HD, 720p or SD. I'm going to leave mine at high bit rate. And when you hit export, it's going to export. And it's going to render the timeline. That's why everybody's export looks the same. It just might take longer on an underpowered computer, but the quality will always look the same. Premiere Pro will blend all of the graphics and the animation, the keyframes, video, LUTs, color, all of that stuff will be rendered at the highest quality on the way out. Okay, so that's one way to export out. Another is to go to the File menu. And you can also use the keyboard shortcut, Control-M on Windows, Command-M on Mac. Export media. Now you can export other formats, EDLs, OMF, this is primarily, and AAF, and XML. All these are really primarily there just to export out basically another kind of universal project for other people to open, whether it's going out as XML to Resolve or something like that. Here we're exporting out our final videos. So we choose Media, and we get the export dialog box, which is broken into several different sections. On the left is a preview. On the bottom is our timeline, so we could check whether we're exporting out the right thing by going through here. And you can also have an in and out point. The rest of these I always leave the way they're set by default. And on the top right, this is where you get to choose your settings. So for instance, you can choose the same match source settings. Now this one's going to be using an MPEG preview, and it's going to show you the export formats there. I think it's better to choose them in here if you're going to them. And you can export to many different formats here. My recommendation is to always choose the presets. because the presets were made by Adobe engineers and they're basing it on the quality of that output. So they're not sitting there guessing. They're actually communicating with YouTube, with Vimeo, and getting the right settings. So H.264 or 265, which is also called HEVC, are very popular formats. So I'll choose H.264, one of the most common formats viewable on any platform. And once you pick a format, then there are a number of presets. And again, these presets are made by Adobe. You can click on this button and save your own presets. You can also import other presets if you want, but you can see they've got you covered. Facebook, high quality, mobile, we've got Twitter, Vimeo, and YouTube. So choose 1080p right there. And it's, like I said, it's best not to mess around with these settings over here. The video settings, let me make this bigger so we can see these settings. So you can see if we wanted to, we could change anything like the frame rate, the encoding settings. Again, I really think you should just leave these as the presets. Audio settings, again, use the presets. Captions if you're using captions. This one can be useful to some, where you can, for instance, log into Creative Cloud, Adobe Stock, Behance, Facebook, an FTP site, Twitter, Vimeo, and your YouTube account. So you would basically log into YouTube, so I'm not signed in, log in. That way you don't have to do two steps where you take this export, load Creator Studio, and then upload. This will take care of it for you. Personally, I don't do this. I don't want things to go live. And I mean, there's lots of settings in here to protect yourself, whether it's public or unlisted or private. I just don't take a chance personally, but you could. And then you could either queue this or export it. So let's hit queue. And this brings up Media Encoder. I already had it running, but yours will launch if you don't. And you can see it puts all the settings there that I chose, and there's the location of where it is. So I can click on that and change it. There's a green button up here to start the queue. You can change this after the fact. So if I really wanted this into a different format, I could choose H.265. I could choose a different format and export it out that way. You can also click on it, and then in these buttons up at the top, you can add another source. You can add another output. You can remove this. You can duplicate this. Click on this so I could duplicate. The first one's going to be H.264. The second one's going to be H.265. Hit the button and off it goes. You can also use all the same presets down here. It's a little bit easier to see these down here, and you can also search by them. So if you click here and choose you can see all the YouTube ones very easily. So you can make your own presets, load presets, lots of great ways to work. And the last thing I want to show you is you can select multiple sequences, right-click, and choose Export Media. And now you'll be able to export all of these and set them in the queue all at the same time. This can be really useful if you're going to be away from your computer for a while and you just want it to crunch away and export all of these different timelines. You can do that. So notice we don't have a preview because we've selected multiple sources, but we still get the same preset menu over here. And then when we hit Q, it will load those into Media Encoder, and then you can start Media Encoder and off it goes. So pretty powerful, pretty easy to use. Like I said, for beginners, just choose the presets. Trust me on this. The best quality you'll get is coming out of these presets. You really don't need to tweak any of that stuff. Whew, we have been through a lot. And I've pointed out a couple times throughout this course about areas where you should watch out for. And the last section, which is coming up next, is troubleshooting. And this is when everything goes wrong and you really need to get some help. All right, we're at the final stage now. And as we all know, nothing goes right all the time, especially with computers, with files, with video. And one of the problems you can have, and this is true of any software that uses a cache, and that is the cache becomes corrupt. Don't ask why, it just does. How do you know it's corrupt? When things aren't working the right way. So Adobe has an interesting way of resetting things. There's several different levels of this that I want to go through. But the first thing I want to look at is this screen here. This is the startup screen. Remember, it has all of the different files in here that we've worked on. And the next step, we're going to clear the prefs and the plugin cache. And when we do, those will be gone. And people freak out and think Adobe has deleted their stuff. Remember, way back in the beginning, we created a folder and we named the folder and we put it in a spot that we knew where it was. That should be your reassurance that even if this stuff is gone from this list, you still know where that stuff is. You look at the list, you cleared it out, I know where it is, I'll load it in from there. That is unbelievably important. You're in control. This list is a convenience. Photoshop does this, Word does this. They're just recent links to outside projects or documents or stuff, okay? So let's reset Premiere Pro. And I said this earlier, some people, this is how they start every day, but it does remove all of your preferences. So all the settings that you've made in your workspaces and stuff, they're gone. I have a tutorial about saving things like that, workspaces. So what you do is you hold down the Alt and Shift key on Windows, the Option and Shift key on Mac immediately after launching it. You have to be really quick. So I've got my fingers over the keys and I'm going to launch that right now. So I'm holding it. You'll know you're successful if you get this here coming up. Are you sure you want to reset the plugin caches and the preferences? And I'm going to click OK. Oh, by the way, the other thing I did was I exported my presets. I don't think they get thrown away. I'm just so paranoid. I don't want to lose them, so I exported them. So I'll click OK. And the list is empty. I don't care because I know where this stuff is. So don't worry about that. Next is deleting the media cache. And I have this open on the desktop. This is my secondary drive. This demo drive is a secondary M.2 SSD in my Dell. And in there I have a folder that I just call Adobe Cache. And all of the Adobe applications point to this location. It's super fast. The cache will be, by default, will be on your Macintosh HD or your C drive. If it's really fast and big, then it's okay. But I tend to like it into a separate place where I've got control and it's not buried in some system library stuff. But we're going to clear it out. So to clear everything out, you start Premiere Pro, but you don't open a project. In the Edit menu, Preferences, Media Cache. And you can see there's where my cache is, and I just browse to it and put it in that location. The rest of these I leave exactly where they are. This database is small, so you don't have to do anything there. But this is where you can click if you want to remove your media cache files. Like delete. If you have a project open, then this second option is not available. The first one gives you the ability to delete unused media cache files. This one, delete absolutely everything from the system. Does this mean it's going to delete your stuff, your media, your projects, your titles? No, 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 no. The cache will be remade where Premiere Pro wants to increase performance. So it starts saving things out. like peak files and stuff like that. So I'll click OK. It's gone. It's deleted. Click OK. All my stuff is still going to open and export and edit fine. No problem at all. It's not an issue. Okay. The next one is if you have a problem project. So if the project itself seems to be wonky, and this happens if you've had the same project and you've edited that project for a long time, maybe weeks or months, something is just funky with that project. A really good fix is to create a new project. And I'm just going to stick this on my test drive. And I'll call this my fix. See, there's one of the preferences that gets reset. So now I've opened a completely new blank project. What you do, go to the media browser and locate that project wherever it might be. And I could have just clicked there. You'll notice it's a project file. Right-click and import that, and just import everything. Now, this one I haven't used for quite a while, so it's missing a bunch of files. That would be the same if I opened it up. But if you just were finished working on this project and then imported it in a new project, all of that project will be now imported into this new project. Resave it. Lots of times this just happens to fix so many things right away. For whatever reason, Premiere Pro is now saving things differently. It's saving stuff in a different location as far as background files, and a lot of those problems go away. So that's another way to fix things. Another problem people have is converting files or importing files, and they're not getting the video or the audio. And that could either be a specific format, sometimes resetting, holding Option or Alt and Shift, then you can try to import them again. I've heard some crazy solutions out there where a couple of people had said if they try to import one of those problem files, then they get only audio or only video. But if they import two of those at the same time, then they get the correct format. I don't know. That seems crazy, but if it worked for some people, wonderful. Other people will convert the name from a .mp4 to .mov, and that seems to work. I have a whole tutorial about using a free program called Handbrake that can convert to a different format. That's what the professionals do. You got a problem format, just create a new version of it, a good quality version, and import that. That's probably the last-ditch effort. Now, the last-ditch effort is a script that I make free available on our store that you can download. And this is a script for either Mac or Windows. And what it does is it completely removes everything, not your media. Won't get rid of your media or your projects, and won't delete your personal information. It removes all the places that Premiere Pro would have saved files, and it's like you've uninstalled and reinstalled. It's a very powerful script. When I used to work at Adobe, we used to call this the nuclear option. And when something was really bad, you just ran that. And now when you load it up, your workspaces are gone, your presets are gone, all the default stuff is if, like I said, you reinstalled everything. So that's the last option. That's on VideoRevealed.com/shop. It's on the store there. You can download that. And we used it for years at Adobe, and people are still using it. I make it available, but it is a run at your own risk. Of course, backup, always tons of backups. As soon as I'm finished here, I'm going over to my RAID, and I'm backing everything up like you should. Whew. Have you made it all the way through? Fantastic. Kudos to you for caring so much about your craft, because every one of us has to learn all the ins and outs about not just the aesthetics of editing, but all the technical stuff that goes with it, because 75% of this has nothing to do with editing. It just has to do with being able to work with files, organize files, protect them, know where they are, name them right, export them, work with titles. It's just, there's so much to learn, but Adobe does a great job of integrating everything inside one application and make it work with other applications like Photoshop and After Effects so easy. So great for you. There's a good chance that you're going to have to watch this several times, especially some of the parts that are new to you. And throughout, you saw that I've got in-depth demonstrations about many of these topics. So you can spend a ton of time here on VideoRevealed learning. I've actually been told by several people that everything they learn from VideoRevealed, and now they actually have a job as an editor based on that. And I'm encouraged by that. I mean, I'm not just some regular guy out of the blue. I worked for Adobe for 17 and a half years. So I dealt with 20th Century Fox and NBC Universal and ABC Hollywood, and I would go into these places and help them understand Premiere Pro as an alternative to what they were using, but I also listened to what they were doing. So all of this is a combination of that information, that knowledge that I've gained over the years. And I've been working in media for 30 years now, so hopefully you're going to get some great value out of this. I'm very encouraged by you taking your time to go through this whole course. I really do appreciate your support. Thank you very much, and good luck.